He walked into the wilderness not to escape humanity, but to rediscover it through the amber eyes of a grizzly bear. For 13 summers, Timothy Treadwell lived among the Alaskan grizzlies, alone, unarmed, obsessive. To the outside world, he was either a madman or a mystic. But in his own eyes, he was a protector, a self-proclaimed gentle warrior guarding bears from poachers, encroachment, and even the government. What began as a journey of self-healing ended in the jaws of the very creature he worshipped. In the fall of 2003, Timothy and his girlfriend Amy Huguenard were killed and eaten by a grizzly in Katmai National Park. The only witnesses? His video camera and the forest that had watched it all. This is not just a story of a man in the wild. It is a descent into obsession, delusion, awe, and primal truth. It's about the blurred line between nature and madness, and how a camera lens can become both mirror and magnifying glass for the darkest corners of the soul. The making of a grizzly man. Timothy Treadwell wasn't born in the woods. He was born in 1957 in Long Island, New York, a suburban boy with average grades, a flair for drama, and a passion for animals. He claimed he was once a competitive diver, nearly got a sitcom role on Cheers, and even faked an Australian accent for years just to seem more exotic. But behind the charming stories was a man unraveling. After losing out on the acting role, he spiraled into drug and alcohol addiction. A near-fatal overdose in the late 1980s changed everything. He claimed that at his lowest point, a bear saved him, not literally, but spiritually. From that moment on, he gave up drinking, left behind society, and found his calling, living among grizzly bears in one of the most remote and dangerous ecosystems on Earth. Every summer, Timothy traveled to Katmai National Park and Reserve in Alaska. With no firearms, no radio, and no team, he camped in bear territory for weeks at a time. He got dangerously close to them, often within feet. He gave them names: Mr. Chocolate, Aunt Melissa, the Grinch. He sang to them, talked to them, filmed them, and perhaps most dangerously, believed they were his friends. Treadwell's footage is stunning. Massive bears lounging in tall grass, cubs tumbling over logs, the roar of waterfalls crashing behind brown-furred giants. But equally powerful is his narration, alternately poetic and manic, sweet and furious. One moment he's weeping over a poached fox, the next cursing the fucking park service or sobbing into the camera, begging for help only the animals could hear. He wasn't merely documenting, and that performance may have kept him alive or led him to his death. The camera as confessional. Over 100 hours of footage were recorded during Treadwell's time in the wild. While most of it shows playful bears and majestic scenery, much reveals a man unraveling. He talks to the camera like it's a companion. He confesses his hatred for humans, his disgust with modern life, and his desire to live and die among the bears. In one chilling moment, he screams into the camera, "I will die for these animals." He pauses, smiles. "I will die for them, but I will not die by them." He was wrong. Director Werner Herzog, who later compiled this footage into the haunting documentary Grizzly Man, noted that Treadwell saw something in nature that wasn't really there. "What haunts me," Herzog said, "is that in all the faces of all the bears Treadwell ever filmed, I discover no kinship, no understanding, no mercy. I see only the overwhelming indifference of nature." Treadwell's camera became both shield and shrine. In filming the bears, he constructed a version of reality where he was loved by them. It was a kind of madness, the beautiful kind that dreams are made of. And nightmares. The bear that killed him. In October 2003, after staying longer than usual, late into the season when food is scarce and bears are aggressive, Treadwell and Huguenard were killed. The bear was an older male, thin and desperate. Treadwell had filmed it earlier that week. Later, park rangers found the bear's stomach filled with human remains. The lens cap was still on the camera, but the tape was running. It caught only audio. 6 minutes of screams, growls, and horror. Amy begging him to play dead. Him screaming, her fighting, and then silence. Neither one of them survived. The bear was later shot and killed. The audio was never made public. Herzog listened to it, then warned Treadwell's friend never to let anyone else hear it. Myth or madness? Treadwell's death sparked fierce debate. Was he a martyr? A fool? A man with mental illness? Or a visionary trying to connect with the natural world in a way few dare to? Experts point to his anthropomorphism, the belief that the bears loved and needed him. Wildlife biologists called him reckless. He was habituating wild bears to humans, one ranger said. That's not protection, that's a recipe for disaster. But some see him as a modern-day Thoreau, seeking transcendence in the wild. He wasn't a scientist, he was a storyteller. And in his own tragic way, he succeeded. The world now watches bears more closely, and the debate over conservation is stronger than ever. The psychology of the wild. Treadwell's story touches on more than nature. It reaches into the psychology of obsession, trauma, and delusion. Experts have suggested he suffered from borderline personality disorder, or perhaps manic depression. His intense highs and lows, his grandiosity, his belief that he alone could save the bears, these are not the traits of a typical conservationist. But they make for a riveting character.
He found purpose in the wild. The bears didn't just save him from addiction, they became his identity. He crafted a persona as protector, rebel, lone wolf. He needed the danger, the romance, the edge. And when he filmed himself in those final days, talking about staying longer, going deeper, trusting the animals, it was as if he wanted the ending he got. A man between two worlds. Timothy Treadwell lived in the space between civilization and the wild, sanity and madness, love and delusion. He left behind more than just recordings. He left a question: where does devotion end and delusion begin? In his own words, I have no love for modern civilization. I'm going into the wilderness, and I will live with the bears, and I will die with the bears. He did, but his voice lives on, echoing across the tundra, calling not just to the animals he loved but to the lost, the dreamers, the broken, the ones who stare into the forest not with fear but longing. Timothy Treadwell's story didn't end when he was killed. In many ways, that's where it began. When park rangers recovered the scene of the attack, they found Treadwell's campsite torn apart, his tent shredded, his cooking gear scattered like bones. But tucked inside one of the surviving packs was a small camera. It had been turned on during the fatal bear attack. The lens cap was still on. What it recorded wasn't footage, it was something far worse: sound. 6 minutes of horror, growling, screaming, pleading, silence, a love story turned horror film. But perhaps the most haunting thing is this: the tape was never destroyed. The tape no one should hear. When filmmaker Werner Herzog began work on Grizzly Man, he was given access to Treadwell's vast collection of video diaries. Over 100 hours of wilderness footage, encounters with bears, foxes, weather, breakdowns. But among those was the death tape. Herzog listened to it. In the documentary, the camera lingers on his face as he wears the headphones. He closes his eyes, shudders, takes off the headset. You must never listen to this, he tells Jewel Palovac, Treadwell's close friend and executor of his estate. You should not keep it. You should destroy it. She nods, but she didn't destroy it. The tape still exists, locked away. No one else has ever heard it in full. But rumors persist, of the final moments, of Amy Huguenard's screams, of Treadwell trying to calm the bear, of silence followed by tearing sounds. Some say the bear left, only to return minutes later to drag Amy away. Others whisper darker things, that Treadwell accepted his death, that he refused to run, that he embraced the animal as it killed him. No one truly knows, and maybe that's for the best. Who was Amy Huguenard? Amy Huguenard is often a footnote in this story, but she shouldn't be. She was a physician's assistant from Colorado, intelligent, introverted, reserved. She had met Treadwell at one of his bear protection lectures. What followed was a slow-burning relationship defined by intensity, volatility, and mystery. While Timothy thrived in front of the camera, Amy stayed behind it, shy, cautious. She didn't share his adoration of the bears. In fact, she feared them. Friends described her as loyal to the point of self-sacrifice. She followed Timothy not out of shared obsession, but out of love, and perhaps fear. She had confided to friends that she sometimes felt unsafe, that his moods were unpredictable, that the wilderness terrified her. In one of the few clips where she appears on camera, she stands stiffly beside a towering bear. Her face is taut. She doesn't speak. She barely moves. Her eyes scan the horizon. It's not reverence. It's dread. She didn't want to return that year. It was October, the end of the bear season. The bears were starving, erratic, aggressive. But Timothy insisted. And Amy, as always, followed. She died screaming, fighting, trying to save the man who had brought her there. The cult of the Grizzly Man. After Grizzly Man premiered in 2005, Timothy Treadwell's myth exploded. He became a symbol, to some a martyr, to others a madman. Environmentalists argued that his footage opened the world's eyes to the beauty of the Alaskan wild. Scientists condemned his recklessness. Psychologists dissected his delusions. But something deeper happened. A kind of cult following emerged. Young people idolized his courage, his radical lifestyle, his rejection of modern life. Online forums dubbed him the last wild man. Artists painted murals of him surrounded by bears. Some even returned to his campsite in Katmai, holding vigils. In one strange case, a YouTube creator began filming themselves living among bears in imitation, until park rangers intervened. Herzog himself warned that romanticizing Treadwell was dangerous. He tried to become one with the bears, he said, but the wild does not reciprocate. Psychosis or devotion. Modern psychology offers chilling interpretations of Treadwell's behavior. Many suspect he suffered from borderline personality disorder, characterized by extreme emotional instability, idealization of others, and a distorted sense of self. His need for validation, his tendency to anthropomorphize animals, his hatred of authority, his black and white worldview, all point towards serious mental health issues. And yet, he functioned, he created, he inspired. But the signs were there: his on-camera rants, his megalomania, his claim that he alone protected the bears, even his belief that park rangers and pilots were conspiring against him. Without me, they'll be slaughtered. I'm the only hope they have. In truth, the bears never needed him. What the footage didn't show. Herzog chose what to show, and what not to. In hours of raw footage, Treadwell's transformation becomes increasingly evident. He grows thinner, more erratic, his voice trembles with intensity. He begins speaking to the camera as if it's alive, whispering to it, apologizing to it, praising it for staying with him. In one surreal moment, he films himself burying a fox that was likely killed by another animal. He sobs uncontrollably, then suddenly smiles, claiming the fox will run free with the spirits of the forest. He thanks the animal gods. He speaks of signs, omens, reincarnation. The forest, in his mind, was not nature. It was sanctuary, cathedral, stage and grave. The indifference of nature. Herzog's central thesis echoes through the film. Nature is indifferent. Timothy saw the wild as loving, majestic, spiritual. Herzog saw it as cold, amoral, pitiless. A bear does not kill out of cruelty, it kills to eat. And humans who forget that, pay the price. In one of the final shots of Grizzly Man, Herzog narrates over footage of a bear's unblinking eyes. This blank stare speaks only of a half-bored interest in food. It does not care about your dreams. It does not care about your pain. It does not hate you. It simply sees you as something to be consumed. Treadwell, in his naivety or faith, believed the bears knew him, loved him, would never hurt him. He was wrong, but perhaps not entirely. Legacy in blood and celluloid. Today Katmai is still home to hundreds of grizzlies. Tourists visit from around the world to see them from a safe distance. And at one quiet clearing, there's a plaque. It reads, "In memory of Timothy Treadwell and Amy Huguenard, lovers of nature, may their souls walk forever in the wild they cherished." There are no bears nearby, only silence and wind. But sometimes, people say you can hear a voice echoing in the trees, a man singing to foxes, a woman whispering, "Don't fight back," and always, the forest watches.
Let me know when you're ready for part 3, which will delve into the timeline of Timothy's final days, the biology of bear aggression, and the philosophical conflict at the heart of Grizzly Man. Can you truly love nature if you refuse to fear it? If a man walks willingly into the kingdom of predators, is his death a tragedy or a fulfillment? Timothy Treadwell's final days weren't marked by terror, not at first. In fact, he was euphoric. After 13 summers of survival, he believed he had reached a kind of harmony, not just with the bears, but with himself. He had outlived his doubters, outfilmed the skeptics, and escaped the orbit of modern life. But the wilderness does not keep promises, and it does not offer happy endings. The timeline of a death foretold. It was early October 2003. The bear season was over. Most had retreated into the mountains to den for the winter. Treadwell and Amy had already left the park, boarded a plane, returned to civilization. But something gnawed at him. He believed a particular bear, an old scarred male who he hadn't seen all summer, was still alive in the region. He needed to check. He needed to say goodbye. So he made a fatal decision. He returned. Against Amy's wishes, against the rhythms of nature, against the warnings of park rangers, who knew how dangerous late-season bears could be. The wrong bear at the wrong time. On October 5th, Treadwell set up camp at the very edge of known bear territory, near Kaflia Bay. He filmed himself that day, exuberant, proud. "We're the last people in the park, everyone's gone, but I know these bears, they won't hurt me." But one bear didn't know him. Bear 104, a massive emaciated male, far older than the others. He had not been seen before in Treadwell's footage. It's likely he had wandered in late, starving, driven by instinct rather than familiarity. To him, the scent of food was all that mattered. The final night, October 6th, the attack likely began just after dark. Audio from the tape reveals the moment with terrifying clarity. Timothy, "No, no, no, bear, no." Amy, "Play dead, Tim, play dead." Timothy, "He's not leaving, he's not, oh God." Amy, get away from him." Roars, thrashing, silence, then her screams again. The bear returned minutes later. The rest is silence. Predator and prey, the natural order. The bear that killed them was later found and euthanized. In its stomach were human remains, parts of clothing and fingers bearing a silver ring engraved with the name Timothy. Herzog, when asked why he didn't include the audio in his film, replied simply, "Because it is the sound of death, it is sacred." But even more chilling is what came next. The bears fed for hours. A second bear arrived. They fought over the remains. By the time rangers arrived the next morning, there was little left but torn clothing, limbs, and a half-eaten spine. There was no dignity in the death, no poetry, only instinct. This is the question at the heart of the Grizzly Man legend. Treadwell loved the bears, obsessively, naively. He saw them as misunderstood, even spiritual. He believed he could bridge the primal divide, that by living peacefully among them, he could show the world that fear was unnecessary. But nature is not cruel, it is not kind, it is simply indifferent. A bear does not hate, it does not murder, it eats. Herzog believed Treadwell's error wasn't bravery, it was romanticism. What Treadwell saw in the bears, he said, was a mirror of himself. But nature is not a mirror, it does not reflect us, it consumes us. The human cost of obsession. Treadwell's final summer wasn't just reckless, it was symptomatic. His journals from that year grow increasingly erratic. He writes of the government tracking him. He claims foxes are whispering secrets. He rants against airplanes and poachers he never sees. His camera shows him yelling at the sky, weeping, then laughing. His obsession with protection became isolation. His identity became myth. And Amy Huguenard, the only other soul who truly saw him, was pulled into that gravity. Her death was not the result of her choices, but of her devotion. She followed him into the wild, and the wild did not blink. Legacy, a death that meant something. Despite the horror of his ending, Timothy Treadwell's impact is undeniable. His footage has been used in conservation campaigns, educational programs, wildlife studies. Grizzly Man remains one of the most haunting documentaries of all time, not just because of the animals, but because of the man behind the lens. He filmed with a child's awe and a soldier's zeal. He spoke to animals like lovers, like gods. He wasn't trained, but he was passionate, and that passion, reckless though it was, gave the world a view of the Alaskan wild that is utterly unique. People still argue, was he insane or enlightened? The truth may be, he was both. Into the silence. Today his camp is overgrown. Foxes run freely. Bears pass through without pause. There are no statues, no crosses, just wind. Visitors sometimes say they feel a presence there, a strange calm, a warmth. Some believe Timothy's spirit still walks there, beside Mr. Chocolate, beside the cubs he named, whispering stories into the branches. Maybe he found what he was looking for, or maybe the forest simply swallowed him whole. Either way, he got what he asked for. He lived and died among the bears. Final words. Before his last journey, Treadwell recorded a monologue. He said, "If I die, if I am eaten, if that's how this ends, then that's okay. That's the price of knowing them, the price of loving them. I'm not afraid." He wasn't lying. He didn't die screaming. He died believing, and that, perhaps, is the most terrifying thing of all. In July 2018, a hiker's lifeless body was found in a yellow tent deep in the Florida wilderness. He had no ID, no phone, no fingerprints on record. Yet he was clean, well-fed, and smiling. By the time his photos spread across Reddit, Facebook, and dozens of amateur sleuth forums, he had already become something more than a dead man. He was a legend. They called him Mostly Harmless. That was the name he'd given other hikers on the Appalachian Trail. But no one knew who he truly was. No one knew where he came from, or why. Despite walking over 1,000 miles and speaking with dozens of people, he'd left no digital footprint. The mystery was so perfect it felt scripted. A man in peak health, found peacefully deceased with no cause of death, and no clue to his identity, except for a cryptic notebook filled with handwritten coding symbols and a single phrase, "Don't panic." For 2 years, the internet hunted his name like a ghost. Some believed he was escaping a dark past. Others, that he was a genius recluse, a real-life Thoreau 2.0. There were even whispers of suicide by design, of a man erasing himself not out of shame, but to become a myth. The truth, when it finally came, was far stranger. It should have ended when they found his name, but the real story of Mostly Harmless Vance Rodriguez only truly began after the mystery was solved. For 2 years, the internet crafted a portrait of a quiet, kind, possibly brilliant man who had peacefully walked away from modern life. He was thoughtful, he was gentle, he didn't carry a phone or seek attention, he shared food, he coded, he smiled. But when his name was finally uncovered, that portrait shattered. Because Vance Rodriguez wasn't a monk, he wasn't a myth, he was deeply broken, and some say dangerously so. The digital resurrection. Once amateur sleuths tracked down the Saga's t-shirt and linked it to old tech forums, the name Vance Rodriguez began to circulate. Quickly, details surfaced. He had lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, worked in IT, had a LinkedIn account, a college background, and a history of employment at multiple companies. His old coworkers described him as smart, intense, and unpredictable. One said, he was brilliant when he was stable, but he wasn't always stable. Others said he could be confrontational, argumentative one day, apologetic the next. His social media posts from 2012 to 2016 hinted at turbulence, political rants, philosophical monologues, depressive spirals. Then, silence. By 2017, Vance Rodriguez had vanished from the internet entirely. No updates, no messages, just digital dust, until his death brought him roaring back, echoes from the past. Once his identity became public, the people who had once loved and feared him began to speak. One woman, who dated Vance for over a year, wrote a chilling account. "I fell in love with a sweet, funny man who made me feel seen, but after a few months I began seeing the other side. He would snap over small things, gaslight me, say I was crazy, then he'd beg me not to leave." She described moments of manipulation, isolation, even subtle threats. He had a way of making her feel like she was the problem, After their breakup, she blocked him, but he would reappear under different emails, sometimes threatening, sometimes desperate. Another woman, a former colleague, shared a voice message she had saved for years. In it, Vance's voice is low, calculated, frighteningly calm. "You think you know me? You don't know anything. I can disappear. Watch me." She had reported him to HR. Nothing came of it. He left the company weeks later. The gunshot that didn't kill him. Somewhere around 2015 or 2016, Vance attempted suicide. According to sources close to him, he shot himself in the head, but survived. The bullet caused physical damage, but also reportedly a psychological break. Afterwards, something shifted. He became more withdrawn, paranoid. He spoke of being watched. He told one person that he'd been reborn, and that Vance Rodriguez was dead. He stopped using his real name, stopped driving, stopped filing taxes. He started walking, becoming mostly harmless. In early 2017, a man matching Vance's description appeared on the Appalachian Trail. Friendly, quiet, strong. He introduced himself as Ben Bellamy, but later changed his trail name to Mostly Harmless, inspired by The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a character who was always underestimated, a joke, a shadow. He told people he didn't want to be photographed. He had no family, no obligations, no past. He walked for months, thousands of miles. People offered to help, give him phones, food, shelter, but he politely declined. Many hikers remembered his strange charm. He once gave a fellow camper his last granola bar. Another time he sat silently beside a campfire for hours, smiling, just listening, but no one ever saw him truly relax. He never let his guard drop. One hiker wrote, "He was there with us, but not with us. Like he had one foot still in another life he wouldn't talk about." The myth versus the man. When the internet knew him only as Mostly Harmless, he was adored, but once the mask fell, opinions changed. Some said he was not a mystery, but a manipulator, that he had inflicted pain, then ran from it, that he had hurt people and refused to take responsibility. Others defended him. They said his past didn't erase the peace he brought to the trail, the kindness he showed to strangers. They argued that the man he became in the woods mattered more than the man he once was. The debate wasn't about Vance anymore. It was about how we tell stories. What happens when the person we romanticize turns out to be deeply flawed? Can we still mourn him? Can we still call his story beautiful? The Notebook revisited. After his identification, forensic techs revisited the strange handwritten code found in his tent. Much of it was indeed Python, basic structures, variables, function strings. But analysts noted irregular patterns, as if he was trying to build something abstract, a simulator, a text engine. No one knows for sure. Some believe it was a way for Vance to stay connected to the life he'd left behind, one final tether to the digital world he once lived in. Others say it was a mental exercise, a lifeline for a deteriorating mind, a way to give shape to chaos. Among the scrawled notes were recurring phrases, "One opticlice, one opt, I am not real," constructs everywhere. This is the last reboot. It's unclear if he knew he was dying, but the Notebook suggests he was preparing for something final, whether death, escape, or oblivion. The final days in the swamp. By the time he reached Big Cypress, he was exhausted. He hadn't eaten properly in days. His water supply was dwindling. Still, he told another hiker, "I'm fine. I've done harder stretches, but the Florida heat is merciless," and his body, already lean, began shutting down. Medical examiners found no drugs, no trauma, no illness. Official cause of death, undetermined. But the prevailing theory is starvation and dehydration, though curiously, food and water were still in his pack. Some believe it was voluntary, a soft suicide. Others think he simply slipped into unconsciousness and never woke up. The strange part, he zipped the tent from the inside, folded his wrappers, lined up his bottles, then lay down, on his back, and smiled. Legacy written in code and dirt. Today Vance Rodriguez rests under a plain marker. No quotes, no poetry, just a name and dates. But online, his legacy lives, in videos, in digital memorials, in the subreddit that still bears his trail name. Mostly Harmless didn't just walk the Appalachian Trail, he walked across our collective imagination. He exposed how badly we want to believe in something pure, and how uncomfortable we become when the truth is complicated. He wasn't a villain, he wasn't a saint, he was a man who tried to become a myth, and nearly succeeded. When Vance Rodriguez died, he left no note, no explanation, only the story others would build in his absence, and build it they did. Mostly Harmless became more than a man, he became a character, a drifter, a monk, a soul seeking peace through solitude. The digital world, obsessed with identity and connection, couldn't fathom someone willingly erasing themselves, so they filled in the blanks. The community of online sleuths gave him a nickname, a backstory, a personality. Reddit threads speculated he was a whistleblower. Others claimed he was a genius who rejected tech after seeing its dangers. One viral theory insisted he was ex-CIA. Another believed he was staging an intentional post-human rebirth. People saw what they needed to see, a tragic hero, a mystery, a puzzle to solve. But what if he didn't want to be solved? The ethics of the internet's obsession. In the rush to find his name, no one stopped to ask, should we?
The same digital infrastructure Vance seemed to run from, forums, face-matching AI, deep searches of LinkedIn, reverse image archives, was used to unearth his past, and with it his traumas. When he was named, the tone changed. Suddenly, he wasn't just mostly harmless, he was Vance Rodriguez, the man with an abusive history, the one with threatening voicemails, broken relationships, a suicide attempt. News outlets ran side-by-side photos. On the left, the serene hiker. On the right, an angry man mid-rant. Headlines shifted from the mysterious trail angel to the troubled past of a hiker named Mostly Harmless. The myth collapsed. The man was dissected. Was it justice? Or cruelty? Healing? Or desecration? His ex-partners, many of whom had stayed silent for years, were now reliving old traumas in the public eye. And the man himself, who chose silence, had his life narrated by strangers. Digital immortality, unwillingly. There's a paradox in this story. Mostly Harmless tried to vanish, but in doing so, he became eternal. Today, his name still trends on hiking forums, documentaries, podcasts, and articles continue to appear. His photo is used in memes about mystery and meaning. A man who left behind no legacy now has a global one. In death, he achieved what social media addicts crave, mass attention, but that attention was never his goal. He never asked to be remembered. He asked to be left alone. And yet, here we are, still watching, still analyzing, still turning over the pieces of his life, like stones on a trail we're afraid to finish. A final wilderness, mental illness, and self-erasure. There's one part of the story people hesitate to speak about: mental health. Vance Rodriguez's life was marked by instability. His journals, his self-inflicted gunshot, his social withdrawal, they all point to untreated depression, and possibly more. But the digital community romanticized his silence, instead of recognizing it as a potential cry for help. The idea of walking away from it all sounds poetic, but what if it's really just walking into the woods to die? Psychologists have a name for this phenomena: self-erasure, the process by which individuals, especially men, detach completely from society as a way to control their narrative before ending it. It's quiet, controlled, designed to leave no mess. Mostly Harmless fit the pattern eerily well. He left no digital trace, refused identifiers, avoided connections, and when he died, he made it easy. Zip tent, dry body, no signs of violence. It looked peaceful. But perhaps the real tragedy was that it looked too perfect. The smile that broke the world. So why did his death affect so many people? Because his smile in that final photo didn't look like fear. It didn't look like grief. It looked like peace. And peace, the rarest of human experiences, carries weight. That image, frozen in time, suggested that he had found something the rest of us are still searching for: meaning, stillness, escape. But now we know, behind that smile was a man carrying decades of damage, regret, hurt, given and received. A man who likely believed that death was the only honest way to end the story. We saw peace, but maybe it was resignation. What remains, Mostly Harmless, isn't just a man, or a myth, or a mystery. He's a reflection of our hunger to make sense of strangers, of our obsession with unfinished puzzles, of our deep fear of being forgotten, and the even deeper fear of being remembered wrong. He was kind to strangers but cruel to people he loved. He was brilliant and unstable. He was seeking peace or running from guilt. He may have wanted to die, or simply didn't care if he lived. Two things can be true. Did he want to be found? In the end, we circle back to the question that started it all. Did he want to be found? Some say yes, that bringing his body and story back to the world gave him dignity, that we owed it to him. Others say no, that naming him destroyed the one thing he asked for: anonymity. But maybe the answer isn't binary. Maybe what Vance Rodriguez really wanted was to become someone else, to leave behind the pain, the anger, the fractured relationships. Maybe Mostly Harmless wasn't a code name. Maybe it was a plea. Don't look for me. I'm no one. I mean no harm. I'm mostly harmless. But now we've found him, and we carry him with us, not as a saint, not as a villain, but as a mirror to everything we run from when we walk into the dark.
It doesn't start with blood. It starts with silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind before impact. The kind you feel deep in your gut when something is wrong and your brain hasn't caught up yet. And then the first image hits. A dog trembling in a cage. A calf dragged by the neck. A monkey screaming into a metal restraint. No music, no warning, just raw, unfiltered truth. This is Earthlings, one of the most disturbing, transformative, and controversial documentaries ever made. Narrated by Joaquin Phoenix, scored by Moby, filmed in secret, and compiled over 5 years, Earthlings is not just a film, it is a confrontation, a mirror, a confession. It shows what most people will never see, and what some will never unsee. The camera that wasn't meant to be there. Earthlings began with a simple question. If animals feel pain, why do we cause them so much? Filmmaker Sean Monson couldn't find a satisfying answer, so he started filming. He smuggled cameras into slaughterhouses, into puppy mills, into animal testing facilities, into fur farms, circuses, marine parks, and meatpacking plants. Over 5 years, his team collected hundreds of hours of covert footage the industries tried desperately to keep hidden. What they captured wasn't just cruelty. It was a system, a machine so vast and normalized that even good people unknowingly fuel it. The result is a film that many have called the vegan maker. But that's not the point. Earthlings doesn't try to preach. It doesn't argue. It doesn't excuse. It simply shows a world built on domination. From the first scenes, Earthlings establishes a single haunting thesis: animals are treated not as living beings, but as commodities. This idea unfolds through 5 chapters. Pets, the breeding, selling, and discarding of dogs and cats, puppy mills pumping out lives like factories, while shelters kill healthy animals every day simply for space. Food, industrial slaughterhouses where cows scream and pigs die slowly in gas chambers, often fully conscious, workers trained to be efficient, not merciful. Clothing, fur ripped from animals still breathing, leather tanned in toxic chemicals by underpaid workers, animals raised for fashion and discarded like trash. Entertainment, elephants beaten to submission with bullhooks, tigers drugged for photo ops, orcas driven mad in tanks 1,000th the size of their natural range. Science, monkeys restrained for days, rabbits with chemicals burned into their eyes, mice mutilated to test mascara. The film never flinches. There are no cutaways, no censoring, no gentle narration. Joaquin Phoenix's voice is soft, measured, and devastating. He never yells, he simply tells you what you're seeing, as if you already know, as if you always knew, and just didn't want to believe it. The moment viewers break. If you watch Earthlings, chances are you'll remember your breaking point. Everyone has one. Maybe it's the footage of baby chicks ground alive by the thousands in hatcheries. Maybe it's the clip of a skinned raccoon dog still blinking. Maybe it's the elephant, curled in on itself, rocking in madness, after years of captivity. Or maybe it's not one image. Maybe it's the slow cumulative effect, the realization that this isn't a few bad apples, but an entire civilization built on quiet, industrialized violence. The film doesn't ask for pity, it demands awareness, and that's why it hurts so much. How the system stays invisible. One of Earthlings' most chilling revelations is how these horrors remain hidden in plain sight. These are not underground operations. These are legal, regulated, and routine. Governments approve them. Corporations profit from them. Advertisements repackage them as tradition, nutrition, luxury, entertainment. Language shields the truth. Processing instead of killing. Harvesting instead of skinning. Animal units instead of lives. And we, the consumers, are conditioned to look away. We're shown cartoon cows and smiling farmers. Never the bolt gun. Never the blood. Earthlings rips away that mask. It tells us, you may not be the one pulling the trigger, but you paid for the bullet. The human-animal divide, a dangerous illusion. A core theme of the film is the illusion of superiority. Humans, Earthlings suggests, don't dominate animals because we have to. We do it because we can, and because we believe we're different, smarter, civilized, chosen. But when you see a cow cry over her taken calf, or a chimp cling to its own severed hand, or a dolphin give up and sink to the bottom of a tank, the illusion begins to break. Science backs this up. Crows use tools. Octopuses dream. Rats laugh when tickled. Pigs outperform dogs in memory tests. Chickens recognize up to 100 faces. Cows form best friends. Elephants mourn their dead. Pain, grief, joy, play, hope, fear. These are not uniquely human. They are biological truths. And yet we treat animals as property, because it is convenient. Why we look away. There's a psychological term called cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs. You love animals. You would never hurt one, but you eat meat, wear leather, buy products tested on rabbits. To live with that contradiction, we tell ourselves stories. They don't feel pain the same way. It's just how the system works. It's natural. It's tradition. Earthling shatters those stories, not with arguments but with images. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. That's why the film doesn't ask you to change. It doesn't need to. It knows that once you know the truth, the change has already begun. The film the meat industry wanted you to ignore. When Earthlings was released in 2005, most media outlets refused to review it. Film festivals rejected it. Sponsors pulled out. It wasn't because the film was poorly made, it was because it was dangerous, powerful, true. The meat, dairy, leather, cosmetic, and pharmaceutical industries operate in the shadows. Their greatest weapon is ignorance. Their greatest fear is a well-informed public. And Earthlings was light in the dark. Despite the silence from the mainstream, the film spread like wildfire through underground channels. DVDs passed hand to hand, bootleg links, activist screenings. It became a rite of passage in vegan communities, a moral awakening for some, a psychological wound for others. Even now, 20 years later, people share stories like, I watched Earthlings and I cried for 2 hours. I threw out all my meat that night. It broke me, but I needed to be broken. The cost of compassion. Watching Earthlings changes people, but it doesn't always feel like enlightenment. It feels like grief. Grief for the animals, grief for the truth, grief for the version of yourself who didn't know. But out of that grief grows something rare, agency. The film ends not with hope, but with a question. What will you do with what you now know? There are no credits, no applause, no calls to action,
Just silence, the same silence it began with, only now, that silence is yours to break. You would think a film like Earthlings would fade, that its imagery would be too brutal, too raw, too emotionally exhausting to sustain attention, but what happened instead was stranger and far more powerful. The film didn't just survive, it spread, quietly, organically, person to person. It moved like a whisper passed between the hearts of people who had seen too much to remain silent. It never had the marketing budgets of Hollywood, no studio support, no commercials, and yet, it reached millions, not through promotion, but through impact. People didn't just watch Earthlings, they remembered it. They talked about it, often with trembling voices. They wrote about it in forums, Reddit threads, blog posts with titles like, "The Day I Changed Everything," "This Film Ruined Me," or simply "Why I Can't Look at My Plate the Same Way Again." Across the internet, it developed a nickname, the Vegan Maker. And though the film never tells you what to do, never says go vegan, those who watched it often found the decision impossible to avoid afterward. Part of what made Earthlings so effective wasn't just the content, it was the fact that the viewer made the decision themselves. The film simply offered the truth, without editorializing. It gave the audience the footage, hidden camera recordings of pigs screaming in gas chambers, cows shot with bolt guns that fail the first time, fish slowly suffocating on decks, monkeys in sterile white labs flailing against restraints. It gave people those images, and let them choose what to do with them. It trusted the human heart to understand, even if it had been conditioned not to. But this effect came at a cost. Many people who watched Earthlings reported not just a shift in habits, but a psychological wound. Some described days of nausea, others, sleepless nights. There were those who cried in the middle of the film and had to pause. One person wrote, "It felt like someone had peeled back a layer of skin I didn't know I had, and every part of the world hurt to touch afterward." This emotional response isn't an accident. It's the product of something deeper, the shattering of cognitive dissonance. Before watching Earthlings, many people separate the idea of loving animals from the reality of exploiting them. You pet your dog, feed your cat, and never think of the pig whose flesh is sold as bacon. You say you care about cruelty, but still wear leather boots. You see animal testing as unfortunate but necessary, and besides, there must be laws to prevent the worst of it. Then you see the footage, the dog crammed in a gas chamber, the goat's neck slit while it cries and tries to stand, the rabbit's head bolted into place as a researcher drips acid into its eye. You realize there is no gentle slaughter, there is no humane leather, there is no clean way to commodify a life, and for many, that realization feels like a kind of death, the death of innocence, or illusion, or both. And yet something else is born in that moment, awareness, and with awareness comes agency. Many viewers, after Earthlings, make radical changes. They throw away meat in their fridge, they stop buying animal-tested makeup, they begin reading labels, researching companies, learning terms like down, wool industry mulesing, veal crates, gestation stalls, vivisection. They begin to see behind the curtain, not just at animals, but at systems, because Earthlings isn't only about animals, it's about power. It's about how industrial systems turn sentient beings into units. It's about how language sanitizes violence, processing instead of killing, byproduct instead of body. The film reminds us that these industries thrive not because people are evil, but because people are detached. And that detachment, learned, repeated, inherited, is what Earthlings dismantles, frame by agonizing frame. Joaquin Phoenix, whose narration in the film is haunting in its restraint, once said in an interview that Earthlings was the most important work he'd ever done. Not Joker, not Gladiator, not even his Oscar speech, which ironically referenced the dairy industry exposed in Earthlings. He believed that lending his voice to the voiceless was the truest use of his platform, and for many, his calm tone, absent of judgment, absent of ego, made the film's brutality somehow more bearable, more intimate, as if he wasn't above you preaching, but beside you, witnessing. The film has also been used in schools, activist events, grassroots campaigns. Vegan groups host watch parties, though often with warnings like, "not for the faint of heart," or emotional trigger alert. Some refuse to watch it twice, others say they have to remember, to stay honest. There's even a quote circulating among activists, "If slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be vegan." But Earthlings is the glass wall, and yet still, most people haven't seen it, or won't. Ask them why, and they often say, "I know it's bad, I just don't want to see it." That alone says everything. They know. On some level most of us do. But knowing is one thing, feeling it is another. That's what Earthlings forces you to do. Not just understand, but feel, viscerally, morally, permanently. The industries exposed in the film, factory farming, animal testing, fur, leather, marine parks, still operate, still profit, still advertise smiling animals, and farm-raised fantasies. But their grip is slipping. With every person who watches Earthlings, who tells a friend, who shares a clip, that grip loosens. Not because Earthlings is viral, but because it is true. And truth, once seen, becomes impossible to ignore. What's even more fascinating is that the film doesn't end on a happy note. There's no montage of rescued animals, no cheerful guitar soundtrack, no bullet point list of how to make it all better. It ends with silence, with the finality of what's been done. It leaves you not with closure, but with a challenge. What will you do now? Some walk away shattered, others, stronger. But no one walks away unchanged, because Earthlings isn't a movie, it's a mirror. And once you've looked into it, you have to decide, will you keep pretending not to see, or will you finally act like the Earthling you truly are? There is something unsettling about the fact that Earthlings is nearly 2 decades old, and yet not a single frame of it feels outdated. The screams are still current, the violence is still legal, the systems are still standing, still humming along like well-oiled machines, feeding on the silence of those who know but do nothing. And perhaps the most haunting truth is this: the animals haven't changed. We have, or at least we've been given the chance to. Since its release in 2005, Earthlings has been called the most powerful film you'll never watch again. It's been banned from television, avoided by streaming platforms, and omitted from academic discussions that claim to explore ethics, but conveniently ignore the ethics that bleed. And still, it moves, hand to hand, link to link, in whispered recommendations between people who say, if you want to understand, really understand this world, you have to see it. The film's cultural impact is difficult to quantify. It didn't explode into public discourse all at once. It seeped in, quietly, like water into a crack, splitting it wider with every passing year. Artists began referencing it in their work: songs, spoken word, photography. Documentaries that came later, like Dominion, Cowspiracy and The Game Changers, owe their visual and emotional DNA to Earthlings. Joaquin Phoenix, long before winning his Oscar, made it part of his personal crusade. He spoke about it on red carpets, in interviews. Even during his Academy Award speech, he referenced the dairy industry, one of the ugliest truths Earthlings dared to expose in full detail. But the most profound impact has always been individual. One person, one screen, one viewing. Lives change not by ideology, but by confrontation with reality. There are thousands, maybe millions, who will tell you, I saw that film and I changed my life. They will tell you how they threw away their leather shoes, cried into their dinner, called their mother and begged her to stop buying foie gras. They'll tell you they woke up differently the next day, unable to look at meat without seeing a body, or milk without seeing the mother it was stolen from. Some will also tell you they couldn't handle it, that it broke them, that they wept in the dark and felt powerless, that the world became uglier after watching it, too loud, too cruel, too hypocritical. These are not signs of weakness. These are symptoms of waking up. Because when you step out of the dream, the glossy ads, the sanitized labels, the smiling cartoon cows, and see the reality, it's impossible to go back to sleep. And yet most people still don't know, or claim not to. They've heard of it, maybe, but don't want to watch. The phrase is almost always the same: I couldn't handle it. That's how deeply the system has trained us, to believe that watching cruelty is harder than funding it, that feeling discomfort is worse than causing suffering. It's not a rational defense, it's an emotional shield, and Earthlings breaks it, not by argument, by exposure. That exposure has begun to trickle upward. Legislators have cited Earthlings when pushing for animal welfare reform. Activists have used its footage in courtrooms. Some countries, inspired by the public pressure that follows a wave of people seeing what the film reveals, have banned certain fur farms, foie gras production, wild animal circuses. These changes are slow, insufficient, but they are real, and they began with awareness, with witnesses. The truth is, Earthlings doesn't just expose what we do to animals, it exposes what we become by doing it. Because this isn't only about cows and pigs and chickens, it's about what kind of species we are, a being capable of gentleness, art, compassion, and yet behind closed doors, also capable of systematic, organized torment on a global scale, done not out of necessity, but convenience, profit and tradition. That is the wound at the center of Earthlings, not the animal's suffering, ours, the moral trauma of a species in denial. It's easy to look at history and ask how atrocities were allowed to happen, how good people turned away, how violence became invisible through repetition and law. Earthlings whispers, it's still happening. You're in it, right now. You've just been taught not to see. That's why the film doesn't give you answers. It doesn't offer easy solutions. It doesn't say buy this product, or join this movement. It simply asks you to look, to witness, to feel, to remember. And once you do, you become responsible, not for all of it, but for what you now know. In that way, Earthlings is not just a film, it's a test, a moral mirror, a dare. It dares you to be better. And if you can watch it, truly watch it, and feel nothing, then perhaps you're not the kind of human you thought you were. But if you do feel something, shame, rage, sorrow, empathy, then there's still hope, because it means the part of you that makes you human is still alive, and that part is the only thing that can save the animals, and maybe in the end, save us too. So watch it, share it, speak it, and most importantly, remember it, because silence is how this continues. But truth, once seen, becomes your responsibility. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to stop pretending you don't know, because now you do.
The story of Bowling for Columbine is not just about two boys with guns. It's about a nation that gave them the bullets. At 11:19 a.m. on April 20, two students walked into Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, armed with semi-automatic weapons and homemade explosives. They murdered 12 of their classmates and a teacher, injured more than 20 others, and then turned the guns on themselves. But what shocked America wasn't just the bloodshed. It was the brutal, terrifying realization that this wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was the symptom of something much deeper. That something is what Michael Moore tried to uncover in Bowling for Columbine, the controversial Oscar-winning documentary that became a cultural earthquake. He didn't just ask why Columbine happened. He asked, why does it keep happening? Why is America drowning in bullets when other countries with violent movies, video games, mental illness, and poverty aren't? And most disturbing of all, are we too afraid to find the real answer? The film doesn't begin with statistics. It begins with irony. Moore shows how, on the very same day as the Columbine shooting, the United States dropped bombs on Kosovo, violence abroad, violence at home, death broadcast in real time. Is it any wonder, the film seems to ask, that America treats violence like a national sport? What follows is a journey through the dark corridors of the American psyche, a place where fear sells newspapers, gun sales fund political campaigns, and the most powerful industry is paranoia. And the most haunting twist? The killers went bowling that morning before they started killing. Moore's investigation pulls no punches. He confronts gun owners, politicians, media moguls, and even pop culture icons. He walks into a bank that gives away rifles with every new account. He interviews members of the Michigan militia in their backyards as they fire AR-15s while explaining their fear of government tyranny. He visits Canada, where guns are common, but school shootings are virtually non-existent, and discovers that most Canadians don't even lock their front doors. So what is it then? If it's not the guns themselves, or video games, or heavy metal music, all of which exist in Europe and Japan and Australia, then what is uniquely American? Moore suggests it's something less tangible, something in the air, a culture soaked in fear. Fear of the other, fear of black people, fear of immigrants, fear of neighbors, fear of tomorrow. And that fear, Moore argues, is a product, sold daily by the media, fueled by corporations, exploited by politicians, a nation trained to expect the worst and shoot first. It's a thesis as bold as it is damning. America doesn't just have a gun problem, America has a fear problem, and that fear is killing us. One of the most disturbing sequences in Bowling for Columbine is also one of the quietest. Moore visits the home of Terry Nichols, the accomplice in the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people. Nichols' brother calmly explains that he keeps dozens of weapons to protect against government overreach. In the background, chickens cluck, children play, a lawnmower buzzes. It's a chilling portrait of normalcy woven with extremism, and that's Moore's point. The problem isn't just outliers, it's what we've normalized. In another moment, Moore cuts between American news clips, graphic, breathless, terrifying, and Canadian television, which is factual, subdued, and calm. Where American anchors scream about murder, disease, and terrorism, Canadians discuss weather and hockey scores. The contrast is absurd and revealing. Moore interviews Marilyn Manson, the rock star who was vilified after Columbine. Some said his music inspired the killers, but Manson, articulate and calm, offers perhaps the most sobering answer in the film. I wouldn't say a single word to them, I would listen to what they had to say. That's what nobody did. That quote hangs in the air, heavy, final, because Bowling for Columbine isn't about blaming one group. It's about asking why so many red flags were ignored, why so many guns were so easy to buy, why two teens could spend months planning mass murder and no one noticed, and more importantly, why nothing truly changed after. Columbine wasn't the first school shooting, and it wouldn't be the last, but it was the one that changed the conversation, or at least it should have. In the months after the massacre, gun control debates erupted, parents demanded reform, schools introduced lockdown drills and metal detectors, but the gun lobby pushed back hard. The NRA held a national convention in Denver, just days after Columbine, just miles away. Moore confronts NRA President Charlton Heston, asking why they didn't cancel or postpone. Heston stumbles, smiles, walks away. It's one of the most painful moments in the film. Not because Heston is monstrous, but because he's emblematic of an entire system that refuses to feel. That moment became infamous. Critics called it ambush journalism. Others called it justice. Moore didn't pretend to be neutral. He never has. But neutrality, in a world flooded with bullets, can feel like complicity. At its core, Bowling for Columbine is a film about contradictions. A country that says violence is wrong, but is the world's top weapons exporter. A country that says all men are created equal, while jailing black men at 5 times the rate of whites. A country that says it loves its children, but lets them practice active shooter drills instead of disarming the shooter. The film is darkly funny, painfully honest, and emotionally relentless, and yet it never loses its sense of purpose, to make you look, to make you ask, to make you feel. Because Moore understands something many documentaries forget.
Facts don't change people, stories do, and this story isn't over, not by a long shot. Years after Bowling for Columbine premiered, the shootings kept coming. Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, Parkland, Uvalde, Nashville. Each time the same questions, the same tears, the same cycle, and still, no meaningful federal action. Moore's film remains both timeless and tragically current. Its footage looks like it could have been shot yesterday. Its questions remain unanswered. Its warning unheeded. But it did something no law ever could. It gave grief a voice. It gave outrage a camera. It gave helplessness a script. It dared to ask, what are we so afraid of? And more importantly, what are we waiting for? In a nation with more guns than people, where kindergartners do lockdown drills and AR-15s are sold with grocery coupons, Moore's documentary isn't just history, it's prophecy. Because until something changes, the next Columbine is always just a matter of time. The silence after Columbine wasn't real. It was merely the sound of denial catching its breath. Because in truth, nothing was quiet. Not the grieving parents who buried their children beneath skies heavy with news helicopters. Not the survivors who watched their classmates bleed to death in the hallways they once called safe. And not Michael Moore, who after Bowling for Columbine became both a lightning rod and a lifeline. The film was a cultural earthquake. It shook Hollywood, rattled Washington, and echoed far beyond the borders of the United States. It won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature in 2003, the first documentary to do so in over a decade. On that stage, Moore used his acceptance speech not for thanks, but for warning. "We live in fictitious times," he said. "We are against this war, Mr. Bush. Shame on you." Half the audience applauded, the other half booed. But that was the point. Bowling for Columbine never asked to be liked. It asked to be felt. And people did feel it, deeply. Some praised Moore as a genius, a patriot, a truth-teller in a nation of liars. Others called him manipulative, un-American, even treasonous. Gun rights groups accused him of propaganda. Conservatives dismissed the film as an attack on American values. But no one ignored it, because it struck a nerve, one that had been exposed, raw and throbbing since April 1999. A nerve we kept pretending didn't hurt. What's astonishing is how far the film reached. Screenings were held not just in cinemas, but in high schools, town halls, and university auditoriums. Activists began using clips from it to push for gun reform. Teachers used it as part of sociology and civics curriculum. Survivors of school shootings shared the film with lawmakers, hoping, maybe naively, that seeing would lead to doing. And yet, despite all this visibility, all this emotional force, the laws barely budged. The Columbine massacre did not lead to an assault weapons ban. It did not introduce universal background checks. The NRA, wounded but not broken, tightened its grip. Politicians offered thoughts and prayers. The public wept, posted, and moved on. Because that's the cruel rhythm of America's relationship with mass shootings. Shock, sympathy, silence, repeat. But Moore refused to be silent. After the film's release, he toured the country, holding panels, town halls, radio interviews. He confronted lawmakers. He challenged media anchors. He stood in front of crowds and said things no one else dared say. "We love our guns more than we love our children." People hated him for it, but many more thanked him. Some of the most powerful reactions came not from politicians or pundits, but from the families of the victims. Tom Mauser, father of Daniel Mauser, one of the 13 killed at Columbine, marched alongside Moore in rallies. He wore his dead son's sneakers as a silent protest. Others who had lost children spoke of the film as both painful and necessary. "It hurts to see it," one mother said, "but it hurts more to know that if we keep looking away, it will happen again, and again." And it did. Virginia Tech, 32 killed. Sandy Hook, 26 killed, including 20 first graders. Las Vegas, 60 killed in a single night. Parkland, 17 killed, by a teenager who legally bought an AR-15. Uvalde, 21 killed, mostly children, while police stood outside afraid to act. Each time, Michael Moore's film came roaring back into relevance, shared again, quoted again, remembered, not as history, but as prophecy. It wasn't just a documentary anymore, it was a mirror, and the reflection was getting darker. But maybe the most tragic irony of Bowling for Columbine is this: it offered answers, real ones, hard ones, and no one wanted to hear them. It said, the problem isn't just guns, it's the culture that worships them. It said, the media thrives on fear, and that fear creates more demand for weapons. It said, racism is at the heart of American gun panic, that white Americans are taught to fear black Americans, that economic inequality creates desperation, and desperation breeds violence, that we build a world where people feel powerless, then act surprised when they grab for power with a barrel. The film did not pretend to solve everything, but it pulled back the curtain. It made the invisible visible. It gave the voiceless a mic. And most importantly, it asked the only question that matters: what kind of country do we want to be? The answers to this day remain unclear. The political climate has only grown more fractured. The gun debate has turned into a trench war, each side yelling across a chasm that seems too wide to cross. School shootings are so frequent they barely break the news cycle. Children grow up learning not just math and reading, but how to barricade doors with desks and stay quiet while their classmates bleed. And so the film stands, frozen in time, a time capsule of a nation in crisis, still waiting for its reckoning. And what of Moore himself? After Bowling for Columbine, he made more films. Fahrenheit 9/11, Sicko, Capitalism, A Love Story, Where to Invade Next. All biting, all controversial, but none as raw, as direct, as emotionally piercing as Columbine. Because that film wasn't just about an issue, it was about children, dead children, and a system that let it happen. In one of the film's final scenes, Moore takes two survivors of Columbine to Kmart, the chain that sold the ammunition used in the shooting. The boys, still carrying bullets in their bodies, ask the company to stop selling handgun rounds. At first, executives brush them off. Then Moore shows up with cameras. The next day, Kmart announces it will phase out all handgun ammo sales. It's one of the only tangible victories in the film. Small, but powerful, because it proves what the rest of the film desperately pleads: change is possible, but only if we demand it. And yet, decades later, the same stores sell the same bullets, the same politicians take the same NRA money, and the same doors swing open to let another shooter in. We haven't failed to learn from Columbine, we've refused to. And that's what makes Bowling for Columbine not just a documentary, but a haunting echo. A warning that will never stop ringing until someone somewhere finally listens. The truth that Bowling for Columbine tried to show wasn't just that America has too many guns, it's that America has too much fear. You can feel it in every frame of the film, not just in the footage of the shooters, or the screaming headlines, or the cold corporate responses. It's in the glances of parents dropping their kids off at school, wondering if this will be the day. It's in the casual way politicians say thoughts and prayers, because they know they'll be saying it again next month. It's in the shopping malls, the movie theaters, the churches, the concerts, the fourth-grade classrooms, all places where blood has been spilled in the name of rights and rage. And beneath it all, fear. Fear of crime, fear of invasion, fear of people of color, fear of teenagers, fear of losing control, fear of each other. Michael Moore understood this. He showed us a country where violence is normalized, not just through guns, but through policies, media, and profit. A place where people are told to be afraid, because afraid people buy more. More locks, more security systems, more insurance, more weapons. Fear isn't a glitch in the system, it is the system. But there's something else Bowling for Columbine reveals, something more haunting: the illusion of powerlessness. The most dangerous myth in America isn't that guns keep you safe, it's that nothing can be done, that the machine is too big, that change is impossible, that shootings are like earthquakes, random, tragic, but ultimately unpreventable. It's a lie, but it's a comfortable one. Moore breaks that comfort. He reminds us that there is a choice, that politicians write laws, that corporations respond to pressure, that culture is made by people, and can be unmade by people too. But there's a cost to seeing the truth. Once you see it, you can't go back. That's why so many people avoid Bowling for Columbine. They'll say it's biased, or depressing, or manipulative. But deep down, what they mean is, I don't want to feel helpless, or guilty, or angry at the thing I've always accepted as normal. That discomfort is the doorway to responsibility. And not everyone is ready to walk through it, but some are. Over the years, Bowling for Columbine has inspired more than just conversation. It's inspired action. Some viewers ran for office, others started nonprofits, organized protests, joined school safety boards, became journalists, teachers, counselors. Not everyone changed the world, but many changed something: themselves, their communities, their classrooms. Because that's where change begins, not in Washington, but in the moment you decide to stop pretending. Still, Moore knew that awareness wasn't enough. Stories are powerful, but stories don't stop bullets. That's what makes the film so painful. It ends not with resolution, but with a reckoning left incomplete. It offers no peace, no promise that it won't happen again. Because it will happen again, and it has happened again, over and over and over. The only question is, what will we do next time? We live in a country where students know the difference between fire drills and active shooter drills, where parents buy bulletproof backpacks, where teachers carry trauma kits alongside lesson plans, where the sound of a popping balloon can cause a classroom to dive to the floor in silence. This isn't just a gun issue. It's a cultural sickness, a moral disease, and Moore dared to call it by its name. He showed us the faces, he told us the stories. He reminded us that behind every statistic is a hallway covered in blood, a child in hiding, a teacher's final breath, a mother collapsing on the pavement outside a school she thought was safe. Bowling for Columbine didn't give us easy answers, but it gave us a question we still haven't answered. What kind of country are we? Are we the kind of nation that shrugs after slaughter, that tells grieving families to wait their turn, that blames video games and mental illness while ignoring the gun shows, the lobbyists, the profit? Or are we ready to become something else? It's not about taking all the guns away. It's about taking the worship away, the mythology, the idea that violence is strength and compassion is weakness. It's about building a country where kids don't die in homerooms, where fear doesn't sell, where laws protect life instead of industry, and it starts with courage. The kind Moore had when he made a film that no one wanted to see, but everyone needed to. Because documentaries don't save lives, but the people who watch them, who act, who speak, who refuse to forget, do. Maybe that's the legacy of Bowling for Columbine. Not a message, not a film, but a spark. A reminder that even in a nation drowning in bullets, one voice can still make noise. One camera can still expose a lie. One story told at the right time, with the right truth, can still break the silence. And in that silence, something new can grow. Not fear, but fire.
This is the story of Issei Sagawa, a man who murdered and cannibalized a woman, walked free, and became a celebrity. To most people, that sentence sounds like fiction, a dark European horror screenplay never meant for production. But Sagawa is no invention. He is real, a quiet, bookish man with a frail body and an unsettling smile, and for over 40 years his name has haunted 2 continents. He did not kill out of hunger. He did not kill out of rage. He said he killed out of love. On a warm summer night in Paris in 1981, Issei Sagawa, a 32-year-old Japanese student of comparative literature, invited his classmate Renée Hartvelt, a 25-year-old Dutch woman, to his apartment. He told her it was for poetry. She believed him. She came, she read, she sat, and as she recited Rilke aloud, her voice echoing softly off the white walls, Sagawa stepped behind her with a rifle and pulled the trigger. She collapsed instantly. He waited. Then, with surgical precision and an eerie calm, he began to cut her body apart. He filmed it, photographed it, ate parts of her flesh raw, others cooked, stored the rest in his fridge. Later he packed what remained of her corpse into suitcases and hailed a taxi. He was caught trying to dump her dismembered remains in a public lake. And yet this is not the most disturbing part. The most disturbing part is what happened next. Nothing. France deemed him legally insane and unfit for trial. He was institutionalized. Less than 2 years later, he was deported to Japan, where he was released almost immediately due to a bureaucratic loophole. He has never spent a single day in prison. Instead, he became a published author, a talk show guest, a fetish magazine contributor, a painter, a subject of documentaries, a minor celebrity, a monster with a following. But even that is not the end. The film Kibō, meaning hope in Japanese, takes us into Sagawa's daily life. Not to glorify, but to interrogate. It is not horror. It is something colder. We are shown a man who still lives freely in Tokyo, old and sickly now, his body collapsing in ways that the justice system never did. He smokes, he eats, he sketches nude women with blunt strokes. His apartment is small and gray. His brother takes care of him. They laugh, and the world watches, asking, is this redemption, or something much worse? There's something deeply unsettling about seeing Sagawa shop for groceries. He moves slowly through the store, his bones creaking, his eyes sunken behind thick glasses. He selects meat carefully, stares at it. The camera lingers just a moment too long. He smiles. That smile is the crack through which the horror leaks, because Issei Sagawa does not deny what he did. He has never shown remorse. He has spoken openly, even gleefully, about the act. He claims he still fantasizes about cannibalism, that the urge never went away. In interviews, he speaks calmly, even sweetly, as if describing a painting. He recounts the murder in soft tones, not defensive, not proud, just factual. He remembers the texture of her skin, the way her hair smelled, the taste of her flesh, tender, he said, like tuna. One journalist asked if he regretted it. He replied, no, it was my destiny. If I hadn't done it, I would have killed myself. I had no choice. But destiny is not justice, and Sagawa's freedom is not innocence. His life, fragile, grotesque, unpunished, stands as a symbol of a system's failure and society's discomfort with its own darkness. Kibō is not just about what he did. It is about what we do with people like him, how we explain them, how we watch them, how we are drawn to them, in horror, yes, but also in fascination. The film makes no effort to redeem him. It also makes no attempt to sensationalize. It observes, coldly, precisely, the way a surgeon watches a beating heart, the way Sagawa once watched his victim breathe. We see him draw. He sketches women obsessively, their bodies exaggerated, distorted. There is a ritual to it. He cannot stop. His art is primitive, yet focused, a visual diary of obsession. When asked why he draws women this way, he pauses, because I am hungry. There is a long silence, then laughter. Not from the crew, from his brother, the same brother who stood by him for decades, who shielded him from legal collapse, who now cooks for him, bathes him, wipes his mouth when he chokes on soup. That relationship is one of the film's most disturbing elements, not because it is monstrous, but because it is human. The brother loves him, protects him, calls him poor Issei. There is no horror in his voice, only sadness. We want to be angry, but something more uncomfortable settles in, pity. The filmmakers never show Renée's family. They do not ask for balance. They simply show the man who should not be walking free. Walking free.
The man who was called insane, now painting, speaking, aging, remembered, as if art absolves, and maybe that's the real horror, not that evil exists, but that evil can be soft, quiet, ordinary. Not all killers wear masks, some wear slippers, and read poetry. The murder was horrific, but what followed was something stranger, a society unsure whether to punish, forgive or forget, a culture that doesn't know what to do with monsters who don't look like monsters, who read Baudelaire, who bow politely, who say thank you and mean it. The camera returns to Sagawa's face. He is older now, very frail, death perhaps, close behind. He stares into the lens, blinks, then says something unexpected. I am sorry she died, but I am not sorry I killed her. No emotion, no flourish, just words. This is the paradox of Kibō. It shows a man who did something inhuman, living a life that is all too human, and we are left with the question, what do we do with men like him? Do we look away, or do we stare until the reflection looking back is our own? There are places the law cannot reach. Issei Sagawa lives in one of them. After his release in Japan in 1986, he did not run, he did not hide, he emerged, gently, as if the world owed him stage time, as if the cameras, the microphones, the headlines, were simply waiting for him to return, and they were. Japanese society, known for its cultural tendency to erase shame and isolate controversy, did not expel him. It absorbed him, not into the mainstream, not fully, but into something stranger, the shadows between crime, media and art, a space where monsters are not punished, but studied, consumed, even in some circles admired. His first published work after the murder was titled In the Fog. It sold out within weeks. It was a memoir, graphic, clinical, and unnervingly poetic. Readers consumed the details, the meat, the smell, the taste, the detachment. He described cutting into Renee's body like a surgeon opening an ancient text. He described her flesh as soft as uncooked fish. He wrote not like a killer, but like a man who had become a connoisseur of something unspeakable. The public responded with morbid fascination. He appeared on television, in tabloid interviews, in erotic magazines, not as a pariah, as an oddity, a real-life demon you could meet, talk to, ask questions, and he always answered. He never turned away from what he did. He repeated the same words in every interview. I wanted to eat a beautiful woman. That's all. There was no remorse in his voice, but neither was there pride. It was something colder, acceptance, as if the event had occurred outside of morality, as if guilt was a foreign word, as if the very structure of empathy had been surgically removed from him. He wrote essays, novels, film reviews. He drew illustrations, hundreds of women, almost all nude, many bleeding, fragmented, distorted. His artwork sold at boutique galleries. Some buyers claimed they were making a statement. Others simply wanted to own a piece of darkness. One Japanese director hired him to play a sadistic killer in a soft-core horror film. The line between biography and fiction blurred, perhaps intentionally. Audiences didn't walk out, they stayed. Some even applauded. Psychologists tried to explain him. Narcissist, psychopath, sexual sadist. Some claimed he had a rare neurological disorder. Others said he was simply the product of indulgent parenting and societal failure, but none of the labels fully fit. He wasn't manic. He wasn't delusional. He was terrifyingly lucid, and that clarity, that calm gaze, was what made him so difficult to dismiss. Because Sagawa didn't hide the monster, he introduced it. He showed it to the world, dressed it in clothes, gave it tea, and watched the world blink in confusion. How do you punish someone who insists he's already damned? His fame, if it can be called that, became a grotesque Ouroboros. The more people tried to understand him, the more he performed. The more he performed, the more fascinated they became. But fascination is not approval, and Japan, for all its initial morbid attention, eventually tried to look away. His media appearances became fewer. His publishers stopped calling. Younger audiences didn't recognize his name. The novelty faded, but Sagawa didn't disappear. He lingered, like a scent on old clothes, like a whisper in an empty hallway. The documentary Kibō is not about celebrity. It is about aftermath. A man who has been allowed to live, slowly unraveling in a room full of ghosts. His health declined. His fingers curled into themselves. He could no longer draw, could barely speak. His brother continued to care for him, almost mechanically, like a nurse who had long since run out of judgment. And yet the interviews continued. Filmmakers came, writers came, students came. They asked him questions, and he answered, even as his voice weakened, even as his mind drifted. Why does he keep speaking? Why, after decades of silence would be easier, does he still choose to recount every detail? Theories abound. Some say it's narcissism, that he cannot imagine the world without his story. Others believe it is punishment, a self-imposed cycle of confession, a way to feel alive, or perhaps a way to keep her, Renee, alive. As though speaking of her reanimates the moment, as though he is still there, in that white room, reciting poetry behind the barrel of a gun. But perhaps it's simpler than that. Perhaps he speaks because no one stopped him. Justice never came. Forgiveness never arrived. Silence never grew. so he filled the void with words. The Japanese public for its part remains conflicted. Some are outraged that he was ever released, others shrug. They say he's old now, let him die. But beneath that fatigue is a lingering discomfort, not about what he did, but about what his story says about us, because Sagawa was not created in a vacuum. He was born into wealth, educated in elite universities, sent to Paris on scholarship, welcomed into academia, treated with kindness, fed by systems that saw his disturbing fantasies and did nothing. He told professors, he told therapists, he wrote about it, he begged to be arrested in Tokyo before the murder. No one listened. Or rather, they listened, but they didn't believe, because he was quiet, polite, intelligent, small, Japanese. He didn't look like a killer. He didn't fit the shape of evil, and so evil slipped through the cracks. That is the real horror of Sagawa. Not just that he killed, but that we let him. That our systems, legal, social, cultural, failed at every turn, and when confronted with the result, we didn't fix the system. We turned the man into a myth. Some stories are too uncomfortable to bury, so we frame them instead, hang them on the wall, sell them at auction, call them art. But the ghost of Renée Hartvolt does not hang in any gallery. She does not speak in interviews. Her face is not sold in books. She is silence. She is the space that the film Kibō refuses to fill. She is the shadow behind every smile he gives. And that, perhaps, is the one punishment Issei Sagawa cannot escape. Not guilt, not prison, but the fact that for the rest of his life, every person who meets him knows what he is. No matter how fragile he becomes, no matter how many words he speaks, there was no headline when Issei Sagawa died. No sirens, no national mourning. No public closure, only a short obituary buried in the inside pages of a local Tokyo newspaper. Issei Sagawa, 73, died of pneumonia in a hospital after a long illness. He was known internationally for a 1981 incident in Paris. He is survived by his brother, and just like that, the man who had haunted decades of tabloid obsession, true crime documentaries, philosophical debates and art gallery conversations, disappeared. No trial, no prison, no apology, no justice, only an ending. In his final years he barely spoke, his mouth trembled, his body shrank, he became dependent on a feeding tube, his hands once steady enough to cut flesh and sketch anatomy, could no longer lift a pen. The same media that once invited him in, now ignored him. He had become useless, even to his own myth, but he never renounced it, never revised it. Until the very end he referred to the murder as a necessary experience, a defining moment. When asked, in his final filmed appearance, if he felt sorrow, he blinked slowly, and said, "I only regret that I was weak afterward." Weak, not cruel, not monstrous, weak. The film Kibō does not end with a bang, it ends with a whisper. Sagawa in bed barely breathing, while his brother wipes his forehead with a cloth. There is no music, no conclusion, just labored breathing, until even that fades. And yet, even as death closed the chapter, the questions Sagawa posed linger like ash in the air, because Sagawa was never just a killer. He was a moral collapse in human form, a test, and many of us failed it. Some treated him like a case study, others, like a performance artist, a symbol of free speech, a walking riddle. But behind every interpretation, the core truth remained. A woman died, brutally, and the man who murdered her lived longer, spoke louder, and was remembered more. This is not just injustice, it is inversion, and it forces us to look inward. Why do we grant killers more attention than their victims? Why does horror seduce us more than silence? Why are we so drawn to the abyss, even when we know what stares back? These are not comfortable questions. They are not meant to be. Kibō doesn't offer answers. It dares us to ask. One theory is that Sagawa became a kind of emotional safety valve, a person so clearly deviant, so thoroughly disturbing, that we could use him to define the boundaries of our own morality. He's the monster. We say, not me. We point to him and feel better about ourselves. But what if the opposite is true? What if he wasn't the monster, just the mirror? Because the society that let him go, that gave him a platform, that bought his books and printed his sketches, is us. We made his name. We fed the myth. We allowed the mask of literature, art, eccentricity to soften the edges of brutality. And in doing so we proved something terrifying. Monsters don't need to hide, not if they're polite enough. Issei Sagawa once said, "If Japan had kept me in custody, I might have repented, but they let me go." What does that tell you? What does it tell us? That morality bends when the crime is too bizarre, that outrage fades when it becomes inconvenient, that horror, when commodified enough, becomes entertainment. It tells us that Renée Hartvolt, a vibrant, multilingual, curious student, is reduced in most searches to a name secondary to his. Her life, her poetry, her smile, all eclipsed by the man who ended them. And that, perhaps, is the final cruelty, because evil isn't just in the act, it's in the forgetting. No memorial was ever built for her in Paris, no fund in her name. Her family never received a formal apology. No official ever took accountability for the bureaucratic mess that released her killer. The silence was as systematic as the failure, and yet Kibō refuses to let that silence win. In its final scene, after Sagawa has died, the film shows a single lingering shot of a pencil sketch, left unfinished on his desk. A woman's face, barely outlined, eyes wide, lips open as if mid-breath. She has no name, but you know who it is. The screen fades to black. There are no credits, only one line. This film is dedicated to the unnamed, the unheard, and the unavenged. And in that moment you understand what Kibō really is. Not a portrait of a killer, but a funeral for memory. A slow, painful wake for the justice that never came. For the girl who read poetry. For the truth that was buried under paper, under television, under books and blood and smiles and soft-spoken interviews. And so we are left not with horror, but with obligation. To remember the name that was not written in headlines. To see the victim where others saw only the killer. To reject the spectacle. To listen for the silence. To resist the comfort of forgetting. Because monsters only thrive in shadows. And forgetting is the darkest shadow of all.
This is the story of Tickled, a documentary that begins with laughter and ends in threats, intimidation, and the discovery of a global empire of humiliation run by a man no one wanted to talk about. It started with a video, a strange one. New Zealand journalist David Ferrier, known for covering odd subcultures and viral trends, stumbled across something he'd never seen before. A group of young athletic men tied down, being tickled, filmed professionally, edited slickly, and uploaded by an organization called Jane O'Brien Media. There was no nudity, no overt sexuality, but something was off. The camera lingered too long, the laughter felt strained, and most importantly, the participants looked uncomfortable. Ferrier thought it would be a quick, quirky news piece. Competitive endurance tickling, he joked, a harmless curiosity for his offbeat column. He was wrong. When he reached out to Jane O'Brien Media for a comment, the reply shocked him. It wasn't playful, it wasn't professional, it was aggressive. A barrage of emails flooded in. Legal threats, personal insults, homophobic slurs, accusations. They called him a disgusting little gay Kiwi. They threatened to sue. They told him to back off. And just like that, the story changed. Ferrier, alongside friend and filmmaker Dylan Reeve, decided to dig deeper. What they found was not just a fetish niche, not just a weird corner of the internet. They found a man named David D'Amato, and behind him, an empire built on coercion, deception, and fear. At first, no one would talk. Former participants disappeared. Some refused interviews, others sent cryptic messages, "Don't contact me again." But gradually, cracks began to form. They found young men, mostly students and amateur athletes, who had once responded to online ads offering up to $2,000 for tickling endurance videos. They were flown out, filmed, and paid. They were told the footage was for a private tickling league. They signed contracts. They trusted the organizers. Then, things got strange. If they tried to quit or express discomfort, they were met with silence, followed by cyber attacks. Their personal information was leaked. Videos were sent to family members, schools, employers. Some were outed as gay to conservative parents, even if they weren't. Others lost jobs. Some had their lives destroyed, all because they wanted to stop. It wasn't just tickling, it was blackmail, and all roads somehow led to the same man, David D'Amato, a former school administrator from New York, and a man with a history. Ferrier and Reeve uncovered court records. In 1999, D'Amato had been arrested for cyber harassment. He had used aliases to create fake identities, including Terry DeSisto, and run similar tickling schemes under the guise of TJ Productions. He had coerced and humiliated dozens of men, all while hiding behind corporate shells, IP proxies, and pseudonyms. He went to prison, but only briefly, and when he got out, he picked up right where he left off. Now, under the name Jane O'Brien Media, he was more powerful than ever. He had legal muscle, he had money, and most terrifying of all, he had no shame. Ferrier and Reeve tried to contact him. They received more threats. They were followed. Private investigators appeared. At one point, 3 lawyers representing Jane O'Brien Media flew from the US to New Zealand just to intimidate them in person. It didn't work. Instead, it made the filmmakers more determined. They flew to the US. They tracked down addresses. They chased digital fingerprints. They sat outside his house. They filmed from cars. And then one day, they knocked on David D'Amato's door. He opened it, briefly, then slammed it shut. But the camera caught enough. The man was real, alive, breathing, angry, and now exposed. The documentary spirals into deeper horror. It's not just about fetish anymore, it's about control. D'Amato didn't just enjoy tickling, he enjoyed ruining people. He weaponized a seemingly harmless act, laughter, and turned it into a tool of submission. He built a sprawling digital web, created layers of shell companies, hired teams to scrub search results, and unleashed armies of legal threats to suppress dissent. Some of his victims remained anonymous, even after the documentary aired. The fear hadn't left. They had lived for years with the anxiety that another video might surface, that a potential employer might find something, that their parents might receive another anonymous email. The damage wasn't just reputational, it was psychological. Tickling, a symbol of childhood innocence and play, had been twisted into a mechanism of power, and David D'Amato, a man with access to wealth, law degrees and time, used it as his private weapon. Perhaps the most chilling realization came late in the investigation. No one had ever stopped him. He had been caught. He had served time. But the system, as usual, didn't understand what he was. He didn't fit the mold of a predator. He was clean-cut, educated, wealthy. He wasn't violent, not in the traditional sense. He didn't leave bruises. He left digital scars. So he kept going. Because no one knew how to stop a man who broke lives with contracts, websites and lies, not fists. And when Tickled was finally released, it was not met with silence. It was met with even more threats. But it was too late. The world had seen him. What makes Tickled such a terrifying documentary isn't the content itself, it's the realization that something so absurd, so ridiculous, could hide something so malicious, that beneath the laughter was a scream, that behind the smile was a trap, that David D'Amato could be your neighbor, your coworker, that he had the time, the money, and the legal backing to torment strangers across the globe without touching a single one of them. And the most disturbing question, how many more are out there doing the same? Tickled is not just about David D'Amato, it's about the digital world we've built, one where obsession can become empire, where humiliation is currency, where visibility can destroy you faster than violence, because once a video exists, it can be weaponized, once trust is broken, it cannot be rebuilt, and once you realize that someone found a way to turn tickling into tyranny, you start to see how fragile freedom really is. When David D'Amato died in March 2017, there was no national headline, no true crime podcast finale, no courtroom victory. He died suddenly, of a reported pulmonary embolism, alone in his Manhattan apartment. A man once called the Tickle King, who had spent decades controlling strangers through digital means, was gone in an instant. But his empire didn't vanish with him. His servers didn't shut down. His contracts weren't voided. His videos remained online, scattered, re-uploaded, watermarked with Jane O'Brien Media's logo. And the lives he had touched, scarred, erased, remained scarred. There was no justice, just absence. And in some ways that was more disturbing than any punishment could have been, because now, there was no more face to the fear, only silence, and unanswered questions. Who takes over an empire built on secrecy? What happens to the ghosts he created? And most disturbingly, why had no one truly stopped him while he was alive? After Tickled was released in 2016, it caused a quiet storm in digital circles. It premiered at Sundance and went viral in that slow creeping way that only the most disturbing stories do, passed hand to hand, whispered between those who didn't believe something so absurd could be so real. Critics praised it for its boldness. Audiences called it the most unexpectedly horrifying documentary they had seen. And yet D'Amato continued to fight. He filed lawsuits, sent cease and desist letters, attempted to block the film's release. He accused the filmmakers of defamation, of harassment, of conspiracy. None of it worked. The truth was out, and for the first time his name, long hidden behind pseudonyms and proxies, was public. But he was prepared. He had built a fortress of legal and digital defenses around himself. He had years of practice, and he knew how to manipulate perception. He would send anonymous messages to Reddit threads discussing the film, pretending to be former ticklers or concerned fans. He would contact journalists with denials under new email addresses. He was, to the very end, curating his own legend, and what's most unsettling is that the line between obsession and identity had long since dissolved. David D'Amato didn't just run a tickling fetish empire, he lived in it. He was it. His New York apartment was filled with stacks of documents, storage hard drives, and printed contracts. He had written notes to himself, reminders to check targets, schedules for video re-uploads, lists of names, victims, participants, enemies. His walls were bare, his fridge nearly empty, his computer ran all night, and when he died he left no family behind, only the architecture of control. What Tickled exposed wasn't just one man's pathology, it was the infrastructure that allowed it to thrive, the legal system which had arrested him in 1999 and then let him quietly re-emerge years later, the internet, where anonymity is armor and humiliation spreads faster than truth, the fetish economy, where consent is murky and power is currency, but most haunting of all, the culture of silence. D'Amato operated in plain sight. His victims had names, faces, stories. Some begged for help, some even sued, but few were taken seriously, because the subject matter seemed so ridiculous. Tickling? Really? And that disbelief was his greatest weapon, because when abuse wears a clown mask, no one runs. They laugh, they look away, they scroll past, and he knew that. He exploited it. He made the absurd his camouflage, which forces a darker question. How many others are doing the same? After D'Amato's death, Tickled took on new meaning. It wasn't just a documentary anymore, it became a digital grave marker, the only real record of what he did, the only monument for the victims who never received justice. And it asks, implicitly, a question that echoes louder after his death. What happens when someone dies without ever being held accountable? We like to think of death as the great equalizer, that monsters eventually face some reckoning. But D'Amato died free, wealthy, protected, and so we are left with the story, incomplete, unresolved, and a legacy that cannot be deleted. His servers outlived him. His contracts outlived him. His videos, some dating back 15 years, continue to circulate on the internet. The men in those videos, some are gone,
Some are still trying to rebuild their reputations. Some have families now, jobs, children, and live with the constant threat that one day, someone will find that video. Because for all our talk of healing, the internet doesn't forget, and when shame is the product, immortality is the punishment. But Tickled does something rare. It refuses to look away. It takes the viewer to the heart of darkness, not with blood, not with violence, but with precision and persistence. It exposes a crime no one thought to name, a psychological horror so niche, so tailored, that it existed in blind spots. David Farrier and Dylan Reeve didn't set out to make a thriller. They set out to understand, and what they uncovered was something no horror script could conjure. A man who weaponized pleasure to create pain, who turned laughter into chains, who found the weakness in systems designed to protect, and built a throne atop that weakness. His death didn't answer the questions. It made them louder. Why wasn't he stopped earlier? Why did no one believe the victims? Why did we laugh when we should have listened? And most urgently, who is doing this now? Because make no mistake, D'Amato was not alone. He may have been first. He may have been the most obsessive. But he wasn't the only one who realized that in the right conditions, a simple act like tickling could become the front door to a dungeon of digital submission. And as long as the web exists, so too does the machinery of exploitation. That's what makes Tickled unforgettable. Not because it's shocking, but because it's true. And the truth once seen can never be laughed off again. The most terrifying thing about David D'Amato is not that he existed, it's that no one really believed he could. Even now, after the lawsuits, after the documentary, after the grave is closed, there is a kind of doubt that lingers, not doubt in what he did. That part is documented, legally, publicly, undeniably. The court records, the emails, the ruined lives, they're all real. No, the doubt is more existential. It whispers, how could something so bizarre be so dangerous? Because tickling isn't supposed to hurt. It's laughter, intimacy, childishness, a reflex, not a weapon. But that's exactly why D'Amato succeeded. He didn't just find a loophole in the legal system. He found one in the human mind. He made the unthreatening threatening. He weaponized the absurd. He understood that if your tools are soft enough, your violence won't be taken seriously until it's far too late. This is where the story of Tickled grows darker than most true crime. Not because of the acts themselves. There was no blood, no chains, no screams, but because it reveals a deeper structure. A network of consent twisted out of shape, where language, legality and shame become tools of domination. When D'Amato asked young men to sign contracts, they did. When he filmed them, he paid them. And when they later begged him to stop releasing the footage, he pointed to their signatures and said, "You agreed." And in a strictly legal sense, he was often right. But that's what makes the horror so much more insidious. Because the question isn't did they sign, it's did they understand what they were signing away. And even more than that, did they ever really have a choice? In the post-D'Amato years, Tickled continues to be shared, quietly, like a warning. New audiences discover it, thinking they're about to laugh, and leave stunned, disturbed, paranoid. It's a film that begins with odd curiosity and ends with ethical nausea. It haunts you not with gore, but with possibility. Because what if this is just one story? What if there are dozens, hundreds of other subcultures built on similar manipulation, operating just below the surface, untouched by the law because they don't look like crime, where the tools aren't ropes or fists, but clauses, edits, screenshots, silence. The internet is a dream machine, but it's also a labyrinth. And people like D'Amato don't need to break in. They build it from the inside. And once you're inside, once you've been filmed, exposed, humiliated, there is no door out. The final scenes of Tickled do not offer peace. There is no courtroom gavel, no police raid, no victim redemption arc. There is only absence. D'Amato's death left a void. His files, unreleased. His data, encrypted. His motives never fully explained. The men he hurt, most of them still won't speak publicly. Some live in fear of retaliation, even from the grave, because the videos remain, the contracts remain, the shame remains, and that's the true cost of a crime like this. It doesn't end when the perpetrator dies. It lingers in hard drives, in cached search results, in silence, in the minds of those who believed a camera was harmless, until it wasn't. We are now living in an age where privacy is a myth, and visibility is a threat, where humiliation can be automated, monetized, distributed globally within seconds, where consent can be twisted, repackaged, and turned against you. Tickled showed us a world where one man, acting alone, could manipulate and intimidate people across countries, continents, legal systems, without ever touching them. What happens when someone more organized, more resourced, more anonymous, does the same? The film ends, not with answers, but with warning. It reminds us that some predators don't look like monsters. They look like lawyers, like producers, like messages that say we just want to film a harmless video. They don't kick down doors. They slide into inboxes. They speak in contracts, not commands. They don't need violence. They have fear. And so the question is not how did this happen? It's how many more are still happening. And worse, would we even recognize them if we saw them? Because the scariest part of Tickled is not what D'Amato did. It's what he taught. That control is easiest when it looks like kindness. That the most effective threats come wrapped in smiles. That the most enduring prisons are built with digital bars, visible only when it's too late. And that the internet, for all its promises of connection and expression, is still a place where power bends reality, and reality breaks people.
David D'Amato is gone, but his shadow remains, and so does the echo of his laugh. Not joyful, not innocent, but sharp, tight, wrong. The kind of laugh that doesn't come from being tickled, but from watching someone else squirm.
This is the story of Robert Eads, a Southern gentleman, a father, a cowboy, and a transgender man who died of ovarian cancer after being refused treatment by over 24 doctors. It sounds like fiction, like the premise of a tragic indie film made to stir social debate. But Southern Comfort is not fiction. It is a documentary, raw, intimate, and agonizingly real. And Robert Eads is not a symbol. He was a person, a man with a deep, gravelly voice, a Georgia drawl, a gentle laugh, and eyes that held both kindness and quiet devastation. And in 1999, he was dying. But this isn't a story about death. It's a story about how a man can be erased while still breathing. Robert Eads was born in 1945 in the conservative heart of the American South. Assigned female at birth, he lived the first decades of his life under a name and body that never felt like his. He married, had children, played the role society gave him. But inside, something deeper was always silent. Until in his 40s, he found the courage to transition. And the South didn't know what to do with that. His family fractured. His job vanished. His support system, brittle to begin with, crumbled under the weight of whispered judgments and violent ignorance. But Robert found a new family, one that didn't share his blood but shared his truth. A community of transgender men and women who gathered not just out of identity but out of survival. They became his lifeline. Then, in 1996, Robert began to feel ill. At first, he thought it was stress, then fatigue, then pain. Finally, a diagnosis: advanced ovarian cancer. It had spread, it was aggressive, and here is where the story becomes unbearable. He was refused treatment, not once, not twice, but by over 24 doctors. Why? Because he was trans. They didn't want controversy, they didn't want complications, they didn't want the publicity of treating a transgender man for what they considered a woman's disease. In short, they didn't want him. And so while the cancer grew, Robert waited. While the tumors spread, doctors turned their backs. While the pain increased, hospitals made excuses, until it was too late. Director Kate Davis found Robert during the last year of his life. She followed him with a camera, not to exploit but to witness, to archive the final months of a man who had already been erased by the system that promised to heal him. And what she captured wasn't just suffering, it was grace under siege. Robert Eads, dying, ignored, shunned, was still laughing, still cooking, still making jokes, still kissing his partner Lola Cola with a tenderness that put most love stories to shame. He wore cowboy hats and boots. He tended to plants. He offered advice to younger trans people. He smoked too much, talked with his hands, and often looked directly into the camera, not as a subject but as a witness. "Cancer didn't kill me," he once said. "They did, and we know who they are. The institutions, the physicians, the rules written in ink that vanishes when applied to people who don't fit the form." But Robert wasn't bitter. He was tired, and in pain, but not bitter. That's the part that shatters you, because he had every right to be. Southern Comfort, the title of the film, comes from the name of an annual gathering of transgender people in the American South, a weekend of workshops, dances, hugs, and chosen family. For many, it is the only time they can be themselves without fear. Robert Eads was invited as a keynote speaker for the 1999 conference. He knew he wouldn't make it to the next one. He knew his body was fading, and yet he prepared his speech like a warrior polishing his sword. He stood before a crowd of trans men and women, many of whom had never seen someone like themselves on a stage, and he told them the truth. They may not see us, they may not treat us, but we're still here, and we've got each other. That was Robert's true medicine: community. When the world shut its doors, his chosen family opened theirs. Lola Cola, his partner, stayed beside him as his strength vanished. His friends took turns caring for him, holding his hand, bathing him, cooking for him, loving him in all the ways the system refused to. They couldn't save his body, but they saved his dignity. The film doesn't flinch. It shows Robert's body, thin, shaking, breaking down. It shows him weeping. It shows him laughing. It shows him kissing Lola with chapped lips, saying, "Ain't she beautiful?" It shows the South, not just as a place of pain, but as a place of resistance, a place where trans leaves are harder, but love is stronger, where family isn't defined by blood but by presence. And most of all, it shows us the quiet violence of neglect. Robert wasn't murdered, but he was let die. He was given a death sentence by people who swore an oath to heal, and that betrayal, that institutional abandonment, is what gives Southern Comfort its unbearable power, because it forces you to ask, how many others? How many trans men and women sit in waiting rooms only to be turned away? How many die undocumented, unfilmed, unloved? How many voices go unheard simply because their bodies don't match a checkbox? Robert died in early 19... He was 53 years old, but in his final year, he became a legend, not a perfect man, not a hero carved in marble, but something braver, a man who told the truth when his body couldn't hold it anymore. And his story lives in every trans person who demands care,
In every chosen family that says, you don't have to go through this alone. In every Southern trans boy who wears boots and smiles crooked and says, my name's Robert too, because names don't die, stories don't fade, and love, real love refuses to vanish, even when hospitals do. Robert Eads died slowly, but not alone. By the time his body began to shut down completely, when food turned bitter and skin thinned like parchment, the medical world had long since vanished. No new doctors came, no hospitals called back, no specialists offered consultations. It had been months since any white coat had crossed his threshold. But still, every day, someone else walked through his door. Friends, trans brothers, lovers, volunteers, family, not by blood, but by will. They came with food, medicine, cigarettes, hugs. They came with stories and silence. They came because no one should die unseen. Robert understood he was leaving. You could see it in the way he moved, slower, softer, like a man folding into the next world. He spoke often of the Southern Comfort Conference, scheduled just weeks away. It had become a final beacon, a goal. He didn't want to die before seeing his family, the one he had chosen, gathered in one place. His partner Lola Cola never left his side. If Robert was the quiet flame of resilience, Lola was the wind that kept it from dying out. A trans woman herself, she had met Robert at a time when both were raw, lonely, rebuilding. Their bond was immediate, not idealized, not romantic in the Hollywood sense, real, rough, resilient. She held his hand when it trembled. She helped him walk when his legs failed. She argued with him when he tried to downplay his pain, and then kissed his forehead when the morphine took hold. They loved each other without performance. There's a scene in Southern Comfort, quiet, unflinching, where Robert lies curled in pain, face damp with sweat, breathing in short gasps. Lola kneels beside him. No words, just touch, just presence. That is not romance, that is devotion. And in the world Robert came from, where to be trans was to be mocked, outcast, erased, such love was more radical than protest. By early 1999, Robert was skeletal. Cancer had filled his abdomen. Every organ was swollen. Yet he insisted, I'm going to the conference. His friends told him he was too weak. He told them he had to, because for Robert, Southern Comfort was not just a conference. It was a home that had never been burned down, a place where names were spoken with pride, where people walked into rooms without fear, where laughter rang without code switching, where someone like him could stand up and say, I'm dying, and the crowd wouldn't look away. That year, the organizers reserved a special place for him, not on stage, but in the front row, wrapped in blankets, surrounded by the people he had lifted, mentored, protected. When he arrived, frail, in a wheelchair, a shadow of the man he'd once been, the room stood. Hundreds of trans men and women, some still teenagers, others elders, clapped, cried, called out his name, not out of pity, out of recognition. They knew what he had carried. They knew who he was. Robert spoke briefly. It was barely a whisper. I love y'all, he said, and I'm proud of us. Don't let them tell you you're not real. Don't let them tell you you're not worth saving. You are. Then, in his old cowboy drawl, barely audible, he added, tell them Robert said so, and that was enough. Because when a man is dying of something that should have been treatable, and still finds it in himself to bless the people who might take his place, that is more than testimony. That is truth made flesh. After the conference, Robert faded quickly. His body, no longer held up by adrenaline or hope, began to collapse. He returned home with Lola. Friends stayed overnight in shifts. No one wanted him to go alone. He listened to music. He smoked what he could. He laughed when he had the strength. And then, one cold morning in the spring of 1999, he stopped breathing. There was no priest, no hymns, no hospital machines, just the sound of his chosen family, sitting in the next room, sipping coffee, telling stories, and keeping his name alive. The final moments of Southern Comfort don't focus on death. They focus on continuation. On Lola, eyes heavy with grief, saying she will keep going. On young trans men, saying they will fight harder for care. On the memory of Robert Eads, not as victim, but as proof that we do not disappear just because we are denied. His ashes were scattered on land he loved. No grave, no stone, just wind and earth and sky. But his legacy is buried in every trans person who demands treatment today, in every doctor who learns from his story, in every family that finally opens its arms and says, you are still my child. Robert Eads is gone, but the world he died in, the one that turned him away, is still here, and that's why Southern Comfort still matters. Because medical neglect is not history, it's now. Trans people are still denied care, still harassed in waiting rooms, still told to go elsewhere, still buried because a system couldn't find it in itself to say, you matter. But there's something else happening now too. More doctors are speaking up, more clinics are opening doors, more stories are being told, and every one of them echoes Robert's voice, soft and Southern. Don't let them tell you you're not worth saving. After Robert Eads died, Southern Comfort did not end. It became something larger. The conference, once a fragile meeting in the woods of Georgia, bloomed into a sanctuary, a radical act of togetherness, in a country that still could not guarantee safety. Each year, hundreds returned. Some came with grief, others with joy. Many came with stories like Robert's, different in detail, identical in weight. And in every hallway, every workshop, every warm-armed hug, his name was whispered, not as a martyr, not even as a hero, but as proof that a life refused by the system can still become sacred. The organizers kept his chair empty that first year, not out of ritual, out of memory, but by the second year, someone else sat there, a young man, newly transitioned, trembling with fear and unsure if he belonged. They said this was Robert's seat, and now it's yours. That is how legacy works in places where names are often taken before they are lived. Robert didn't live long, but he lived fully, and in his death, the community found its spine. Southern Comfort grew, not just in attendance, but in impact. Doctors began attending panels. Therapists came to listen, not diagnose. Medical students sat in front rows, notebooks open, asking questions like, how do we make sure this never happens again? Robert Eads became case study material, not as pathology, but as systemic failure. His name was printed in syllabi, his story included in diversity training, and though his death certificate could not capture his truth, his life rewrote the language of trans healthcare education. Still, questions remain. Why in the 21st century are transgender patients still denied care? Why do so many doctors flinch at the word transition, as if it carries infection? Why do so many clinics, even today, refer trans individuals to other facilities, sometimes hundreds of miles away, citing policy or discomfort as justification? And the deeper question, how many more Robert Eadses are out there right now, slowly dying, politely, quietly, so that no one has to feel uncomfortable? The answer is not measured in statistics. It is felt in waiting rooms, in phone calls that are never returned, in ER visits that end in referrals instead of treatment, in the soft voice of someone saying it's probably just stress when it's cancer. Lola Cola, Robert's partner, continued his work. In interviews, in panels, in hospitals, she told the story. She told it softly, without rage, without theatrics, because truth doesn't need fireworks, it needs room. She helped build trans-inclusive care programs. She counseled families of newly out teens. She cried in private and spoke in public, never letting Robert's story fall into legend. She made it practical. Don't make him a symbol, she said. Make him a reason to pick up the phone, to book the appointment, to open the door. That's how healing works, not in grand gestures, but in policies, in empathy, in care, and in care that does not ask who you are before it saves your life.
Years later, the Southern Comfort Conference moved from Georgia to Florida. The landscape changed, but the mission didn't. Some worried the move would dilute its soul, but Robert was never about geography. He was about recognition. So when the name Robert Eads is spoken now, it does not echo through tombstones. It moves through living people, through survivors, through patients who almost didn't go to the doctor until someone said, "You deserve to be here," through nurses who remember the footage from Southern Comfort and say, "Not on my watch." In one of the last letters Robert ever wrote, discovered in a box after his death, he scribbled a line, "If I could live again, I'd still be me, but I'd want to be heard sooner." That line became a mantra for a generation of trans advocates, to be heard sooner, seen sooner, treated sooner, loved sooner, because no one should have to die for the system to admit it was wrong. So what remains? An old cowboy hat, a film, a community, a name, and the questions that continue to haunt us. How many more will be turned away? How many more are told, "You're not our kind of patient"? How many more will only be remembered after they're gone? And the answer, the only answer that matters, is this: not one more. That is the vow we owe Robert Eads. That is the promise whispered in clinics, in classrooms, in conference halls. That is the flame we pass. And that is why Southern Comfort still matters. Because in a world that still tries to erase trans lives, it remains steady, Southern, and soft-spoken, as living proof that love, once chosen, never dies. This is the story of Titicut Follies, the documentary that America tried to bury, because it showed the truth about what happens behind the locked doors of a mental institution. And the truth was unbearable. In 1967, a man named Frederick Wiseman brought a camera into Bridgewater State Hospital in Massachusetts, a correctional institution for the criminally insane. What he captured was not therapy, not medicine, not healing. He captured hell. Men stripped naked, mocked by guards. Patients, their faces empty and swollen, force-fed like animals. Cold cells, shouts in the night, laughter where there should have been empathy, isolation where there should have been care. There are films that tell you a story. This one doesn't tell. It shows. It shows so much that within months of its release, the state of Massachusetts sued to have it banned, and won. The film would be locked away for 24 years, unseen by the public, under the claim that it violated patient privacy. But the real reason? Because it revealed what happens when society decides someone no longer counts as human. Bridgewater was supposed to be a hospital, but it looked like a prison. It smelled like a morgue, and the men inside were not treated as patients. They were warehoused, forgotten, abused. Wiseman, a former lawyer turned filmmaker, had originally been granted access to document the institution's approach to criminal rehabilitation. The title Titicut Follies came from the name of the facility's talent show, a bizarre yearly performance where guards and inmates sang songs and danced on stage in front of each other, a circus in a cage. But what Wiseman found was not rehabilitation, it was ritual humiliation. Inmate patients stood in line naked under flickering lights as guards barked questions and jokes. One man, clearly schizophrenic, begged for release. The staff responded with mockery. They mimicked his voice. They told him he was crazy and going nowhere. Another was fed through a metal funnel, food pushed into his mouth like cement, his eyes vacant, his lips trembling. And one patient, a skeletal, desperate man named Vladimir, became the soul of the film. Thin, terrified, and constantly talking to invisible voices, he asked for a cigarette, for water, for mercy. The staff answered with silence, or worse, with derision. He would die not long after filming wrapped. Titicut Follies is not edited for comfort. There is no narrator, no music, no context, just footage, raw, uninterrupted, invasive, like a ghost floating room to room, bearing witness to a system designed not to treat illness, but to neutralize it, to contain suffering, not alleviate it. And because it told the truth so plainly, it became dangerous. After its first public screening in New York City, legal action was swift. The state claimed the film violated the privacy rights of the inmates, but Wiseman argued truthfully that the prison staff had signed full releases and the patients had been declared mentally incompetent by the state, meaning their guardians had consented on their behalf. It didn't matter. The courts sided with the institution. The film was banned from public screening. Only academics and medical professionals were allowed to view it under strict supervision. Why? Because it made viewers uncomfortable. Too uncomfortable. The truth, after all, is hard to market, and Titicut Follies wasn't about changing minds. It was about showing what happens when minds are broken, and no one cares enough to fix them. The staff at Bridgewater weren't monsters in the traditional sense. They were ordinary, which is precisely why they were so terrifying. These were not sadists in uniform. They were underpaid civil servants, tired, frustrated, ill-equipped, caught in a system that valued control over compassion. And yet, they participated, they laughed, they degraded, because the institution gave them permission, and when cruelty becomes normalized, it ceases to look like cruelty at all. Wiseman never returned to Bridgewater. He didn't need to. The footage he captured would become his legacy, and the state's shame. But the film's ban made it more powerful. It turned it into a myth, like a forbidden text, a whisper in classrooms, a challenge passed between activists, med students, human rights lawyers. Have you seen Titicut Follies? Those who did never forgot, because you can't. Once you see a man stripped of his dignity, screaming in a hallway while a doctor smokes a cigarette nearby, that image brands your brain. Once you hear a man beg to be treated like a person, and watch his plea dissolve into laughter, that sound echoes for decades. And once you realize that the building still stands, and that others like it still operate, you understand that the film is not just history, it's prophecy. In 1991, the ban was finally lifted. A judge ruled that too much time had passed, and that public interest now outweighed privacy concerns. The decision didn't come with fanfare, but in film circles, it was an earthquake. When Titicut Follies was finally screened widely, viewers were stunned, not because the film had aged, but because it hadn't. The systems it showed, neglect, bureaucracy, institutional violence, were still alive and well. New buildings, new uniforms, same indifference, inmates still treated like animals, mentally ill patients still criminalized instead of cared for, facilities still underfunded, understaffed, and overpopulated. And so Titicut Follies went from banned artifact to essential curriculum. It is now taught in film schools, in psychiatry programs, in criminal justice seminars, not for shock, for understanding, because what Wiseman captured was not madness, it was America's mirror, and we are still staring into it. When Titicut Follies was banned in 1967, it didn't disappear, it mutated, from a film into a warning, a secret text passed among professionals, ethicists, students, and underground film circles. It became a kind of cinematic ghost, haunting institutions that still bore the same sterile smell, the same metal doors, the same fluorescent shadows. For nearly 25 years, it existed in legal limbo, not forgotten, but silenced. And while the public couldn't see it, Bridgewater went on exactly as it had before. The abuse didn't end, the walls didn't come down, the cells didn't grow warmer. The men inside, still naked, still screaming, still ignored. The only real change was that now, the outside world had less reason to ask questions, because the camera was gone, and that was exactly how the system wanted it. Frederick Wiseman, the director, refused to give up. Though the state buried his film under court orders, he spent the following decades making over 40 documentaries, each one peering into American institutions, hospitals, schools, police departments, welfare offices, libraries, always unflinching, always observational, always patient. But Titicut Follies was different. It wasn't just a documentary, it was evidence. And once the courts took that evidence away from the public, the meaning of the film deepened. It became more than a portrait of one institution. It became a question. If they worked this hard to hide what was shown, what else are they hiding? The answer, sadly, was everywhere. In the years that followed, dozens of exposés surfaced about abuses in American mental institutions. At Willowbrook State School in New York, children with developmental disabilities were found covered in sores, neglected for days. Senator Robert F. Kennedy visited and called it a snake pit. At Pennhurst in Pennsylvania, journalists documented rooms filled with screams, restraints, and rotting walls. The public gasped, then forgot. In California, Florida, Massachusetts, from coast to coast, reports piled up. Doctors overprescribing sedatives, patients locked in solitary for weeks, food withheld as punishment, sanitation ignored. These were not isolated incidents. They were the result of a culture that treated mental illness as contamination, something to be hidden, controlled, and erased. And in many of these places, the only real difference between now and then was that no one was filming. When the ban on Titicut Follies was finally lifted in 1991, it wasn't because the court had a moral awakening. It was because the men in the film were presumed dead. Yes, the reasoning behind lifting the ban was that the patient's right to privacy had expired. They had died, and thus the footage could be shown, not out of justice, out of legal convenience. But the moment it returned to screens, the effect was nuclear. Audiences, now decades removed from the 1960s, sat stunned. The black and white grain did nothing to soften the impact. If anything, it made it feel timeless, because the images were not tied to an era, they were tied to a system, and the system had barely changed. Bridgewater itself, the central location of the film, continues to operate. Today it's known as the Bridgewater State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, under the Massachusetts Department of Corrections. There have been renovations, rebranding, staff training, new procedures, but the basic structure remains, a facility designed to confine, not heal. Over the years, reports of mistreatment have continued to emerge. A 2009 review by the Massachusetts Disability Law Center called conditions harsh, punitive, and prison-like. In 2014, the Boston Globe uncovered reports of excessive force, including the use of shackles, pepper spray, and prolonged restraint. As recently as 2017, Governor Charlie Baker announced reforms after another patient death raised alarms. Each time, reforms are promised, policies rewritten, cameras installed. But Titicut Follies reminds us, architecture cannot heal trauma. And here lies the core tragedy. Wiseman's film didn't just document abuse, it documented our collective tolerance for abuse. We see a man trembling, forced to shower while being ridiculed. We see another man medicated into stupor. We see guards laugh while patients cry. And yet, when the film was released, people were more outraged by its existence than its content. They were angry the film showed suffering. Not that the suffering existed. That is the paradox of Titicut Follies. It was too honest to ignore, but too horrifying to embrace. And so it sat in darkness, just like the men it filmed. Today, Titicut Follies is required viewing in some medical schools. Professors show it to students studying psychiatry, ethics, law. They pause it. They ask questions. What do you notice? Where does care end and cruelty begin? Because it is not a film that teaches. It is a film that remembers for you. It remembers the patience. It remembers the silence. It remembers what we choose to hide, and how many people die because we hid it. In the final moments of the film, the camera lingers on a hallway, empty, cold, echoing. You can almost hear breathing. Or is it wind? No closing statement, no redemption, no final note of hope. Because Wiseman knew the truth. Some stories should not resolve. Some stories should haunt. Because if they don't, we forget. And if we forget, we repeat. What happens when you finally look? That was the question left hanging after Titicut Follies was unbanned and reintroduced to the public. For years, it had lived in whispers and academic vaults, its reputation built on what no one was allowed to see. But once the film could be viewed openly, the weight of that visibility became impossible to ignore. You watch it once, and you're never the same. And for many, it wasn't just emotional. It was catalytic. Doctors left screenings and rewrote intake procedures. Lawyers saw legal gray zones that required legislation. Filmmakers saw a new way to hold power accountable. Because Titicut Follies didn't just document suffering, it weaponized witness. It showed what a camera, quiet, neutral, unblinking, can do when it refuses to look away. Its legacy lives in investigative documentaries like The Thin Blue Line, The Act of Killing, For Sama, and 13th, all of which bear the same unflinching gaze. Body cameras, now standard for many U.S. police forces, a direct answer to the public's cry for visible accountability. Whistleblower footage, from detention centers, orphanages, ICE facilities, psychiatric wards, prisons, each echoing Wiseman's work. The DNA of Titicut Follies is now embedded in every iPhone recording police brutality, every hidden camera in a hospital, every viral video showing a person with a mental illness being mishandled or misjudged. Because the idea it proved, that silence kills, and footage forces reckoning, became undeniable. And yet, reckoning doesn't equal justice. Because even with cameras everywhere, institutions adapt. They know how to stage compassion. They know how to smile for audits, how to clean up just long enough to pass inspection. They speak the language of reform, while preserving the architecture of cruelty. And that's why Titicut Follies remains urgent.
because it reminds us what the performance of care can hide. The words may change, the uniforms, the diagnoses, the pharmaceuticals, but the core question remains. When a person loses control of their mind, do they lose their humanity too? The fight didn't stop with Wiseman. Advocacy groups, empowered by the visibility his film created, began pushing for more transparency in mental health institutions. In Massachusetts, patient rights groups demanded access to video documentation of institutional practices. In New York, the Willowbrook consent decree was expanded partly on the precedent that came from Titicut Follies. Across the U.S., training curricula began to include trauma-informed care, ethics of involuntary confinement, and media literacy around mental health. And still, stories emerge. In 2020, a viral video showed a schizophrenic black man in a North Carolina ER, shackled to a chair, screaming, left for hours without care. He died alone. The camera caught everything. In 2023, inside a California facility for women with dual diagnoses, a journalist exposed months of neglect, women locked in rooms, food withheld, medications overused. These are not aberrations, they are symptoms. But something else has changed too: the public. When Tickled Follies was first shown, the dominant reaction was discomfort. People didn't want to believe what they saw. It was too raw, too unscripted, too... Now the discomfort is still there, but it's joined by outrage. And that outrage matters, because outrage organizes, and organization changes policy, but only if we stay awake, because the system too learns. It learns how to hide in plain sight, and that's why Tickled Follies still cuts so deep, because it shows us that cruelty, when routinized, ceases to register as cruelty. It becomes procedure. It becomes paperwork. It becomes that's just how it's done. And unless someone walks in with a camera and a refusal to look away, it never stops. Frederick Wiseman once said, "The institution is always stronger than the individual. But when you show the institution, the individual becomes visible again." That is the central power of Tickled Follies. It gave visibility to the invisible, and not for pity, for recalibration. Because when we see people as they are, we can no longer accept the stories we're told about them, that they are dangerous, that they are broken, that they deserve what they get. We see instead that they are simply us, stripped of protection, abandoned by systems, left to rot in a room where the light never turns off. And that realization doesn't fade when the credits roll. So what does Tickled Follies ask of us now? Not guilt, not tears, but responsibility. To watch more carefully, to believe victims sooner, to push for access where it's been denied, to reject any system, medical, legal, political, that tells us you don't need to see what happens inside. Because when doors close, and no one watches, hell begins again. The footage is grainy. The face is long dead, but the scream is still echoing. And now that we've heard it, we don't get to pretend we didn't.